Morning, everyone.
Morning, everybody.
Good morning, Phil.
Just give it a minute. We've still a few people short. It won't be long.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes, we can. Just double checking that everybody that's meant to be here is. Maybe we just do a quick check. Ms. Major, is everyone from the council that you're expecting to be here? You're not missing any support crew or?
On mute. She's on mute.
Yeah, you're on mute. There you go. I think you're off mute now.
Can you hear us, Victoria?
Don't think so.
I think you have your sound turned off. I might have to put a sign up.
Yeah, I'm on board now. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Hi. No, I'm not.
Connection. Okay, you're right.
Can we just do a, while we're waiting, let's just do a roll call and make sure everybody else can hear and we can hear everyone else. Ms. Rolfe, you loud and clear both ways?
Yes, I can hear you very clear. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. That's good. Ms. Spillane, if you could just also introduce yourself, because we haven't seen you in this earlier stuff. So A, can you hear us, and B, could you introduce yourself, please?
I can. Good morning, everybody. My name is Josie Spillane and I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Hampton. So Ben Blair is our General Manager, who is in his last day today. So I'll be taking over from this point moving forward.
Okay.
Oh, wow. Ms. Running, we can't hear. No pressure. Ms. Running, we can't see you, but I think that was the case last time. But you
yes,
can,
my
you can hear us.
office. But yes, I can hear you.
Okay.
All good.
Mr. Blair, your sound's off, but you can hear us. Okay, that's good. Mr. Swears.
Yes, I can hear you.
Thank you. Mr. Cooney.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Ms. Tiaho.
Yes, morning everyone.
Good. Mr. Fulton.
Yes, I'm fine, thanks.
Mr. Wood.
Yes.
Thank you. And Mr. McLaughlin.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. That's good. It looks like there's.
So Victoria's just having issues with her speaker, so she's going to try and rejoin. It was working yesterday. She's just going to try and rejoin Zoom using a different way.
All right. It's a bit of a shame to have a speed bubble because we had a hearing earlier in the week and it worked like absolute clockwork. Now, now we've got a technology glitch.
That's why Simon Bridges drove to Wellington.
Now we don't have any. I wonder if one of the council folk can actually ring her and talk her through some of this, because nothing's happening at her end, for as far as I can tell. The sound's muted. There's no video.
Phil, do you just want to introduce Suki to the rest of the people here?
Oh yes, my apologies. Yeah, where are you? See, there you are. Suki, sing and maybe just wave so everyone can spot you, or say something in a minute.
Me. Hi, everyone.
Suki is helping the panel in terms of decision writing, and even though we aren't making any decisions until much later, as we've announced previously, we are sort of writing things up as we go to make the job easier at the far end. My apologies, I don't think I introduced you last time either, Suki, so that was unintentional on my part. I apologise for that.
That's okay. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yes.
loud and clear.
Yeah, we can, thank you.
All right, thanks.
Is somebody contacting Victoria? Thank you.
Just to fill in time a little bit, the Mary Dragster area, how far away is that from Hampton Downs?
Roughly, it's probably 2 kilometres.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But I can actually Google Earth that while we're waiting. My 2 kilometres last time turned out to be about 500 metres, so I wouldn't take my word for it, to be honest.
Mike, can you pull your screen or your camera a bit forward, because we could just sort of see. Yeah. Yep, that's better. Thank you.
Better, yeah.
I can see Ms. Majors, looks like she... Can you hear us now? She's got a sound off again. Just turned the sound off.
I'm mute here.
Yeah,
Can you hear us, Vic?
no sound, sorry.
Are you there?
Okay.
I think they might be.
Sorry.
I think you might need to sit a bit closer to your speaker, Ms. Major, so we can hear you. It's very faint.
She is having trouble hearing you guys, and so what I've asked her to do is dial in, use the phone option rather than the video.
Okay.
Going to dial in.
So we're still waiting for her to join that way, yeah?
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
And I measured it at 2.8 kilometres from the interchange bridge to Dragway Road intersection.
Okay. And sort of generally, how many events do they have there? Do you know a year? What would they have?
Hard to say. You'd have to probably get that accurate
Okay.
information immediately, to be honest.
Yeah. Okay.
Gosh, this is taking an awfully long time to dial a phone number. I think we might make a start, Ms. Ratt, and that we might use you as a surrogate Section 42A report author, if that's okay with you, because I just don't want to spend all day waiting for...
She's just here now, Phil.
She's there now?
Hi, Vic.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes,
We
we
can
can.
now.
Wonderful.
Good. Apologies about
Right.
that. I'm not sure what happened.
No, not sure what the problem is there. That's okay though. What we thought we would do, given that we've had the conversation with folk last week, is that, and I think sort of as signalled at the end of that conferencing, rather than do the normal sort of evidence questioning thing that normally happens at hearings, we thought that we'd get each of the people that are here, not each of the people, each of the parties that are here to briefly explain to us where they think they're at in the process in terms of agreement and disagreement and what their key issues are. And then we might run this more like a workshop and just work our way through the latest set of red line provisions on the assumption that we would like to get to the end of this morning with something that's agreed between people. We'll be much more forthright, I think, in terms of the feedback that we would normally expect to give at something like this. But we think it makes sense, given that everybody's got to the point of being very close to alignment, that if we can, if you like, seal the deal on that today, it's going to make life easier long term for everybody. Otherwise, we end up in a situation when this hearing will end, no one gets a decision for 12 months because that's when the decisions come out, and everybody's sort of forgotten what it was that was discussed and agreed. And we'd like to eliminate the risk of that, bearing in mind that this is a spot zoning and it doesn't really have any consequences for the plan as a whole. So whilst we won't be issuing any decision, I think our intention would be that if we can issue a minute at the end of this that records what's been agreed, that will be helpful to everybody going forward. So are people happy with that as an approach for today?
Yes.
And when I ask those questions, it would be good just to get the representative of the organisation. So Mr. Wood, you're representing NZTA today, is that right? Or is that Mr. McLaughlin?
No, that's me.
Okay, that's fine. And Ms. is it Spillane or Spillane? I'm sorry, Spillane.
Either or is absolutely fine.
What do you
Derek
prefer?
McLaughlin is our legal counsel for Hampton Downs.
Right, I'm sorry, yes, I got my names mixed up. So either, but
Yeah.
maybe Mr. McLaughlin will address you and Mr. Wood in terms of the views of the parties, and then we'll take it from there. So Mr. McLaughlin, are you happy with that as an approach?
Yes, that's our preference as well, sir.
Thank you. And that's okay with you, Mr. Wood, and that's okay with Ms. Major and Ms. Ratt, yes?
Yes.
Victor, if I may just clarify, would you like Victoria to give her opening statement, or would you like to just go straight into the detail?
No, I don't think we need it. I mean, I'm happy either way. We want to get to the nitty gritty. Having a lot of background information, I don't think helps any of us. We're all familiar with the background. We've read everything. You're not very far apart, and it's just a matter, we think, of going through the details. I think if Ms. Major gives an opening statement, that everybody else will want to do one. The opening statement is there. We've read it. Everybody's seen it. I don't think it's going to help us that much by going through it again. But we will ask you first, the council first, to give us an opening statement, if you like, in terms of where you think things are at and what's still outstanding. So to the extent that that's what she was going to cover, that would be excellent. But the background information and all the other sort of stuff that's there for the record, we don't need to hear about. So if we could do that, if we can spend maybe 2 or 3 minutes with each party just saying how they see things, and if they all agree that Ms. Major's summarised it perfectly, then you probably won't even need 2 or 3 minutes. You'll just be able to say, yes, we agree, so that we can get into the nitty gritty as quickly as possible. Is everyone happy with that?
Yep.
Yeah.
I'll take that as a yes. Okay, well, on that basis, Ms. Major, can you just take us through where you think things are at and what the key outstanding issues are, please?
Yes, sure. So from my understanding, yesterday afternoon we received the final agreed version of amendments between NZTA and HD Land. I guess in my view that this means that those issues that were addressed or raised in the pre-hearing conferencing have been resolved, and I did list them in my executive summary on the final page. So that's in terms of the motorsport and recreation events. Adding a restricted discretionary activity rule, the landscaping and screening, I think we've reached agreement there. The signs, we've agreed on the increased area of sign to 5 square metres, and kind of merged a couple of the points there in terms of its visibility from the state highway, and additional controls around the content of the sign. Traffic management standards, we've changed the traffic management rule, which was 26.2.7, moved it to the end of the chapter as standards, and the events are required to comply with those standards. And there are a few tweaks in the rules there that are agreed. I think there might be a couple of differing views around my revised wording for the adjective. I'm not sure. Ms. Rolshe did provide evidence on that wording, so I'm not sure if she's agreed on what I've amended there. But otherwise, that's where I think things are sitting.
What do you think, what do you see as being the key issues of, if any, that are still unresolved, which is what we really want to focus on?
Well, in my view, there's the main matter was the traffic management aspect and the signage, and from what I can see, both NZTA and HD Land have agreed on those standards, and that was circulated with my executive summary.
Okay, no, I just wanted you to be, I just wanted all of us to be very clear that that's what your understanding was, so there was no doubt. Right. Mr. Wood, what's your situation?
I mean, yeah, I agree with what Victoria's just outlaid. I don't think there's any issues of outstanding concern for us. Our matters that we've added to since conferencing have all been included, which relate to the assessment criteria, 26.1.3. We've just added some text around State Highway 1 Hampton Downs interchange, landscape and screening. We've tightened that up. There's an advisory note been added there from Hampton Downs. We're all in agreement with those clauses. The signage we've sought to, which is 26.2.11, we've sought to accommodate the request to reduce the signage location from 1 kilometre to 500. So we've added some clauses around font size and symbols, and then probably our key one, which has been reinstated, which was the traffic management standards, which is 26.5, and those standards come from the 2006 consent, and they relate to, in particular, travel time along State Highway 1 on the approaches to the Hampton Downs interchange, and matters related to deceleration links, etc., in relation to the ramps. And that was a key issue. So we're grateful to see that back in the version.
Okay, that's excellent. Thanks, Mr. Wood. Yeah. Mr. McLaughlin?
The way we saw this sort of running today was that if we wanted to walk through the changes and explain to the panel why we've made those changes that have been agreed, then we could do that. Otherwise, we could just sort of move on from those and just accept them as they are. And then Paul or Rolf would walk through some aspects of her evidence that may not have been addressed, or just clarify, starting with the points around the objectives that have been signalled, and then just go through different aspects of her evidence that may not have been covered. We saw that as being quite systematic or surgical in that method. On that basis, Paula, do you just want to identify any key issues that you want to walk us through today, and maybe make a brief agenda of those issues?
Sure. So we all accept that we've got agreement with NZTA on those matters already identified. The things I just want to raise is in relation to Chapter 9, Objective 911. and that's talked about in paragraph 14 of my evidence. There's also a minor matter which relates to Rule 26.111. It's really a rewording issue. And then paragraph 16 of my evidence, Rule 26.114. There's some wording alterations there.
Yeah, I don't think we're too keen on just going through wording alterations just by reference to policies that we've got to turn the pages to look at. We'll go through this line by line and cover those. If you could just confine your comments to telling us the nature of what it is that's still outstanding, as opposed to what the policy number is and where it is in your evidence. I think we're going to get more out of it by you saying, look, the key issues outstanding are the objective 9.1 still doesn't do X, policy 9 point whatever it is still doesn't do this, so on and so forth. That way I think we'll get a much better sense of what the day looks like than the approach that we're doing at the moment.
Right. So starting from the start, objective 911, we still don't like the wording of that. Victoria mentioned that she'd made some changes. I haven't seen that, and that's about the rural character and amenity being maintained. In terms of the operational motorsport area in Precinct A, the wording of motorsport circuit is used. We don't believe that's appropriate and it should relate to racetrack. In terms of the permitted activities in Precinct B and E, these should relate to existing residential apartments, and we would like to see that 80 existing residential apartments are identified. And also in relation to Precinct E, we would like it to be very clearly identified as the number of industrial units that are existing is included within the rule. In terms of the controlled activities for the minor racetrack area in Precinct C, there's activities which are provided for motorsport and recreational facilities. There is no rule which actually allows for the construction or alteration of buildings or structures, which is provided through the rest of the plan. Now, I guess one of the biggest issues is noise. We believe the noise standards are not aligned with variations that have been provided in the past, but also in relation to the actual noise levels. And the advice that has recently been received by Tonkin and Taylor basically implies there's a 8 dBA difference of opinion here between what's provided and what the new standards will apply. So we are seeking that a special audible characteristic penalty shall be applied in this case. And just the other matter in terms of noise, we would like to ensure that any noise management plan relates to any new activities, and also an advisory note there to make the regulator aware that a noise management plan exists under the 2006 resource consent. And there's just a couple of other minor matters that are in relation to two of the rules, 26.34. They both, in 26.35, they both have discretionary activities which are for non-compliance of the rules. And I believe they should be more restricted discretionary activities for those areas of non-compliance, rather than the company having to go through a full discretionary activity.
Right, thank you. No, that sets the scene. I wonder, before we start, let's just see, before we get into detail, whether the panel has any questions about where you've got to thus far, so we can clear the air on those first, and then when we go through things line by line, we can drill down into the detail then. Perhaps if we start with you, Mr. Fulton.
Yeah, no, I've got nothing at this stage.
Ms. Tiaho?
Nothing from me. Mr.
Cooney?
It's just a sort of a procedural process matter. We are trying to redirect this into the NPS National Planning Standards, and I wonder whether the use of the word precinct A and precinct B are appropriate, given that the standards actually set out precinct in a sort of a different context than that. And maybe we can discuss later where we think this will fall, and probably Ms. Major can comment on that, where this falls within the national NPS standards. But it seemed to me that we should be calling these areas Area A, Area B, Area C, rather than precinct. I'll just raise that, and we might want to just discuss that later on.
Are you wanting comment from me on that now, or is that we're discussing this later?
Well, we can deal with it now because it's common to everybody.
Yeah. I've had a look at the NPS zone names and descriptions, and I think the stadium zone would be most appropriate, which is one of the special purpose zones. I don't think there's any other fit really. That one, I can read out the description for you if you like. In terms of the precinct A versus area A, I mean, I guess I have no issues with that, if that's where we're heading. But yeah, as long as I guess that each of those areas are described.
Yeah. Is this really a stadium type zone, or we can add, I said the standards say additional special purpose zone, which seems to me you can describe some other zone under those special purpose zones. So maybe it's something we can have a look at later, or you can comment on later on that.
Perhaps I can help here.
Yeah, sure.
I've been doing a little bit of work on the national planning standards, and you can have a special purpose zone if it's of significance to your district.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. The other thing is, as you mentioned about precincts, you can have precincts as part of a particular chapter.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, I don't think, I think we're going to have a look at this as we proceed, and I'm just really signalling there may be some changes there to bring it into the NPS framework, and I think we're going to notify everybody once we've done that so they can have a say. So you'll get an opportunity to comment on that much later in this process, but I just signal that anyhow, it's just a matter of rewording things and to bring it into line.
Thanks, Mr. Cooney. I don't think I have any questions at the outset. What I think we should do is just walk through the document, and we should probably start with the objectives and policies in Chapter 9, and then deal with the rules in Chapter 26. I'm just wondering what the best version to use. I think it's probably the best version to use is probably, well, in terms of the rules, the one that came through last night, which has got the comments in the margin, which reflects the matters that are agreed. I don't think there's a similar document for the Chapter 9 provisions, and the latest version of those that I'm aware of is the one that's in the Section 42A rebuttal report, unless I've missed something. Is that correct, Ms. Major?
Yes, that's correct. That's the most recent version for Chapter 9.
Well, I wonder if we then start with the Appendix 2 version from the rebuttal statement on the objectives and policies, which is only a page long anyway, and if we put that up on the screen, please, Ms. Kelly, then everyone will be able to see it and we'll be able to be very clear what we're looking at. And then I think we just go through it. And I guess stress again, it's a little bit unusual. You're going to get a lot more feedback from us than we would normally do, because we see there's merit in this being more of a workshop than a hearing, in the sense of, you know, you presenting evidence, us asking questions, and then we disappear and make a decision in due course. And I just want to make sure people are aware of that. So we should have a shared screen in a moment.
Chapter 9, did you say?
Yes, it's Appendix 2 of the 42A rebuttal report.
Thanks.
How are we going there? Are we found it? There we go. That's it. Thank you. Just for those of you that are a little bit new to this, if you are of a mind to, you can see both the people that are talking and the provisions of the shared screen on a split screen. And if you hold your cursor and you see up the top of the page, you'll see a green box that says you are viewing Sandra Kelly's screen, and to the right of that it'll say view options. You click on view options and select side by side down the bottom. You should see the screen, the split screen on one side of your page, and a series of tiles of people speaking, and then you can grab a margin between the two and increase or decrease the size of each of the individual screens. So if you want to see who's talking a bit more clearly, you can do that as well. So let's go through, and I think we don't want to focus on what the problem is, we want to focus on what the solution is. So Ms. Rolfe, you've got some issues, as I understand it, with Objective 9.1. Can you explain to us what they are and what the, well, not what they are, what the wording ought to be, please?
So we were concerned about the rural character and amenity are maintained, and there's been some amendment there. I guess the main issue here is about the different types of activities surrounding the Hampton Downs site. So for example, you've got the Spring Hill Department of Corrections facility, you've got Enviro Waste Landfill, you've got the Gull Service Station, you've got the Mary Dragway, sure that's a couple of kilometres away, and the Waikato Expressway. So we didn't think the rural character and amenity should be maintained. And And I see that they've reworded it there, the rural character and amenity of the surrounding rural zone is maintained. I'm not sure that whether or not the landfill site and the correction site, are they still in the rural zone?
Yeah, I can answer that. Yes, they're both in the rural zone.
You've told us what the concern is. What's the solution from your point of view?
I think it's really the rural character and amenity of the adjoining sites is maintained.
Is that what you'd prefer to see it say?
Rather than the surrounding rural zone, yeah, I would have thought so. What's your thoughts on that, Ben or Josie?
I'll actually get Ben to come in on this one since he's been in the background of it. Ben, can you provide some commentary?
Yeah, look, I'll probably take Paula and Derek's counsel on this one, to be honest. I tend to agree with Paula on this, but Derek, have you got any additional feedback?
Yeah, I'm with Paula. The adjoining zones rather than the surrounding rural zone. The surrounding rural zone is really broad and it includes activities that don't hold values that are consistent with the regular rural zone and character amenities. And so if we can reduce that back so that if in the situation you open up a discretionary activity where you're looking at objectives and policies, then it is somewhat more confined and we're not opening up a huge can of worms. So on that basis, I would support Paula's view that the track changes there is amended to the adjoining properties as opposed to the surrounding rural zone.
What's your view on that, Ms. Major? Do you have any issue with that?
Yeah, no, I've got no issue with that. I admit that, yeah, that the policy, the objective could be improved. So yeah, I'm happy for it to refer to the adjoining rural sites.
Let's just check whether I mean, this is the unusual part. Normally we just stop at this point, but I think if the panel's got any concerns or questions about that, it's probably helpful if we raise them now, as long as the parties are happy with that. I'm assuming that because no one's rushed to the microphone and said they've got a problem, then they're okay with it.
It's Linda Tiaho speaking. I don't have a problem per se, but I'm just wondering, is the issue here that you don't want any responsibility to have to maintain any rural character and amenity of areas that aren't rural in character, such as those, you know, other things that you've named, and that if there is any obligation on you, you really only want to have that obligation in the immediate area that surrounds the motor park? Is that the issue? And if that's the issue, then I think that the solution that you've proposed sounds reasonable to me.
Yeah, I think that yeah, it clarifies it quite nicely. It's just what is the scope of the rural amenity that Hampton Downs have to protect, and if we can limit that to those immediate areas, then they're really happy to do that.
Yeah, I think it makes sense for me. I'm happy about that.
Yeah, I got no problem with it, Phil.
No, and I think it makes sense too. And I think the other part is that if you're maintaining the amenity of the immediately neighbouring properties to the extent that that same sort of amenity exists beyond it, then you're de facto protecting it anyway. And if something is not rural, then it's exempt. So I've got no problems with it either. I think it makes sense.
So how would that read now? How would that read now? The rural character and amenity
of, I think it was of adjacent rural, the rural character and amenity of
the adjoining rural properties or sites.
Yeah, I don't think anything hinges on sites or properties. We can deal with that in the wash up. But let's say, I think sites is probably the more appropriate word. I think that's the term that's used in the rest of the plan, isn't it, Ms. Ratt?
Correct, yes it is.
Okay. I wonder too, if is there a Word version of this available? This is a PDF. Is there a Word version of this? I know this might take us a few minutes to get it up on the screen, but if we can make the changes as we go, then they're written down and there's no doubt about what it is. I'm not sure who the right person to ask. I suspect it's either Ms. Ratt or Ms. Major.
Yeah, there's a Word version. I'll send through a copy to Sandra so she can bring it up on the screen.
If we can replace, Ms. Kelly, if we can replace this version with the Word version you're about to get, and if are you able to make the changes that we're talking about as we go? Is that?
Yep, sure.
That'd be really helpful. Thank you. Let's just pause for a moment while we get that up and running. So I know this might be a bit tedious, but I think at the end of the day, it'll mean a better result for everybody. So we're only apologising to a limited extent.
Is that the only matter dealing with the Appendix 2, the objective and policies? Is that the only issue that's outstanding?
From our point of view, yes.
Let's get this version up on the screen because there's just a couple of very minor things that I just wanted to ask about.
Yeah, sorry, it's taken me some time to load things, so bear with me.
How are we going, Ms. Kelly? Have you found it?
I haven't even sent it through to her yet, sorry. My computer keeps freezing, so just bear with me, I'm almost there.
Okay. Can I raise a couple of other questions then that that sort of are related, and they're all to do with the style of drafting and to ensure that we've got succinct, plain language, as opposed to a whole lot of unnecessary verbiage. The first one concerns 9.1.1a, and it's grammatical. It seems to me that wording should say, not say to continue to use and develop, it should say the continued use and development of the Hampton Downs Motorsport Park as a regionally significant motorsport and recreation facility, because the tense of that's completely different from all the others. So I would have thought that should say you'd replace to continue to use and develop with the words the continued use and development of. I'm assuming that no one would have any objection to that.
Definitely not.
No, that's fine.
The second one, which is more fundamental, is in policy 9.1.1.1, and the policies that follow all repeat the objective by saying enable the continued operation and development of da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da by providing for. Why don't those policies just say provide, like policy 9.1.1a just says provide for a wide range of motorsport and recreation activities and the development of facilities to support the motorsport and recreation activities and events. Why does the objective need to be restated at the start? The objective still applies. It just seems to me it's just a whole bunch of unnecessary words. Does anyone have any comment on that?
I certainly support a more simplistic means and ways of dealing with your objectives and policies.
I mean, the policies have to give effect to the objectives. So why do we need to restate the objectives at the start of the policies? That's my question. And that's in 9.1.1.1 and 9.1.1.2 and 9.1.1.3. So 9.1.1 would just say provide for a range of what's currently in B and C. 9.1.1.2 would just say provide a precinct-based approach such that precinct A, precinct B, precinct C. And then 9.1.1.3 would say mitigating adverse effects by managing. It may not seem like a big deal, but when we end up with a plan with 30 chapters and each objective and policy's got 2 lines of extra words that don't add anything, at least in my view don't add anything. We're just adding and cluttering up the plan with unnecessary verbiage. Ms. Rolfe, you're happy with that approach?
Yeah, I definitely am. And if we could, once the document comes up on the screen, and make those amendments now.
I just want to, we can worry about the draft, that's fine, we will certainly do that. But I just want to get a sense from folk that doing that, if anyone has a different view, then I'd like to hear it now while we're talking about the concept of it. And then we can tweak the words as we go. Mr. McLaughlin, do you have a view on that?
No, I support that approach. So more simplistic it is to interpret, the better for us.
Okay, that's good. And Ms. Major, do you have an issue with that?
No, I also support that.
Any thoughts from the panel?
Not really, Mr. Chair. I just look at policy 9.1.1.2. It does say a precedent approach that enables. I quite like the word enables, but I don't think anything turns on that.
But if that was the case, that would be in the objective to say the continued use and development of the Hampton Downs Motorsport Park is enabled as a regionally significant motorsport and recreation facility. I would have thought that would go in the objective if you want to use that enablement.
Yeah.
Because it applies across the board.
Yeah, okay. Yep.
Phil, I think we've talked about plain language all the way through the plan so far, and I'm agreeing with what you're saying here. I know this has been carried over, but now's the opportunity to replan it, and I think what you intend to do is very, very good, because I think we want to get away from all this gobbledygook and too much language repeating stuff. So I think that approach we're talking about now is good.
Okay, that's good. Mr. Yahoo, just a bit of check in with you too.
Yes, I'm in full support, Phil.
Okay, there we go. And now we've got a version on the screen. Could you just there's a fair bit of the screen empty. Are you able to zoom in on that? That's looking really good. Perfect. So what I think we've got is that, well, let's do objective B first, because that's the one. Actually, that's not the same version. It won't matter. That's not the same. That's the appendix. That's not the appendix 2 version. That's an earlier version. That might be appendix 2 of the original 42A report, I'm thinking. That's not the same version that I don't think it matters, because there's only one chain. I think we can deal with it as we go. Let's do B.
Possibly won't matter for the chapter 9. I think it will matter for the rules.
The rules. Yeah, no, exactly. There's only one that we have to change. Let's do B, because we've agreed that. So it says rural character and amenity of. And has someone got those words, please?
Of the adjoining rural sites.
Is maintained. Everyone happy with that?
Yep.
So if we go back to A, the suggestion that I've got is to delete the bit in red at the start. And say the continued use and development of. And then at the end, after facility, say is enabled. How does that look? Everyone happy with that?
I'm happy with that.
Yeah.
Let's do it by exception. Is anyone unhappy with that? I'm going to assume that if no one puts their hand up, they're going to say, I'm not happy with it. So that's fine. If we go to policy 9111.
Can I just speak to that, Phil?
Yeah, sure.
I think that's a good change, the putting on the enablement, because that means it certainly recognises that the park continues to develop in the way that it's been set aside to do. So I'm pretty happy with that.
Okay, that's good. So if we go to 9111 the policy, the next one, delete all the words down to up to by. Or and providing, and just say provide for. Then I think what's B and C should be 1 and 2, but I don't think anyone's going to worry about that. We can tidy that up later. Everyone happy with that?
Yeah.
Similarly for provide a precincts-based approach and then delete everything that from the first read that down to the end of Motorsport Park. Everyone happy with that?
Yep.
Yep.
And then down to 9113, delete all the redlining, mitigating adverse effects by managing. I know that was a submission point by NZTA wanting that to go back in, but it seems to me that the whole purpose of this is to implement the objective, which is the one above, and it's just repetition. So unless, Mr. Wood, are you happy with that?
Yep. happy.
Okay, excellent. All right, that's a wrap on that. Thank you.
Just looking at 9.1.1.3
Yes.
Romans 1.
Yes.
And it reads, so that adverse noise effects on surrounding rural zone are minimised. In accordance with our amended objective, would it be more accurate to say on the adjoining sites rather than surrounding rural zone?
What are the views? I mean, there seems to be a logic to that.
I'd support that.
I have no issues in theory. I guess I just don't want it to be adjacent rural sites because that would just restrict it in terms of noise, and noise can obviously travel a lot further than that.
But if you're protecting the amenity of the one immediately next door, doesn't that mean if you're protecting them, the one further away, yes, it will travel further, but by protecting the next door neighbour, you'll be protecting the neighbour of the neighbour?
Yeah, I guess, yeah. I think I'm no noise expert, but it may affect, you might have a more exposed site that's further afield and another site, I guess in theory and in terms of the topography of the area, it's probably okay.
I suppose an alternative might be to just take the reference to on the surrounding rural zone out altogether. That might be another alternative. Just say the scale, intensity, timing and duration of activities so that adverse noise effects are minimised.
Yeah, I would be comfortable.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that, Mr. Chair, because it could be read to apply internally within the operation of the park. So I think its intention is outside the park.
Yeah, and that's a fair point too. Mr. McLaughlin's suggestion seems to make sense to me. Does anyone have any objection to it?
No.
I think that's a sensible change. Effects on the, what did we say? Adjacent rural sites. We use the same word.
Adjoining rural sites.
Adjoining rural sites, sorry. Okay, everyone happy with that?
Yep.
Sure.
All right, let's save that. That's good. Now we need chapter 26, and I think the version that we need is the one with the comments boxes on it, preferably as a Word version.
Do you have a copy of that, Sandra?
I'm just double checking if the version that we got sent a version of this last night, which I've printed out, but I'm just double checking whether it's a Word document or not. I think it is.
Is that okay?
Yeah, I think it.
Okay.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is.
Okay.
It is a Word document.
Okay.
Here it is. Do you want me to email that to you, Sandra?
No, I've got it. I've got it. Thanks, Phil.
Okay. Sorry if this appears a laborious process, but I really do reiterate that I think if we get to the end of this with a document that everybody can walk away from, away with, I mean, not away from, poor choice of words, then that'll serve everybody's interests better than just saying your piece and leaving it to us. So hopefully you guys see it that way as well. See a flower.
Are they your orchids, Sandra?
No. Is it not there? Is it not showing? No.
Showing a big purple flower.
Can you see anything now?
Nope.
Yeah, I can see it.
Have you got two screens?
Yeah, just check which screen.
I think you might be sharing the wrong screen. I'm just thinking.
You're probably right. Oh, yes, I was too sorry. Can you see it now?
Yep.
Yeah.
Perfect.
That's good.
That's fine. Sorry about that.
No, that's good. Do we need to comment? I don't think we need to comment on that first page, do we, or do we? Both the comments relate to NZTA having no concerns with the matters, and I think we picked the points that are all raised there up later anyhow, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's go to the next page. What's happened to the, did you just flick a page down? Sorry, I was reading my paper copy.
You told me to go to the next page. Was I already on the right?
There's a, oh, no, sorry, it's that bit at the, it's the bit at the top. There's no issue with, sorry, oh, that table's in a different posi from what it's showing on my paper version.
Oh, okay.
But that's okay. Is everyone happy with that red lining at the top, which is sort of a zone introduction statement? Seems to me to make sense. Yeah. Right, let's move on. Everyone's happy with that. No one's commented on it. But those where it's the tables, just keep going down, please. Sure. Those words actually precede the ones that are on the top of that page, and the tables sort of seem to have got in the middle, but that's okay. So land use activities, permitted activities, that's okay. Let's go to the next page. Let's focus on the comments boxes.
All fine.
So no one has any issues with any of that, as I understand it?
No.
No.
Okay. Down to, next ones are on P5. Might just need to scroll down a little bit further. Yeah, we'll come back to the left-hand column in a minute. But I think if we can see those comments boxes, I think that all of them, that would be helpful. If you could just take it down a fraction more, please. Whoops. That's it. That's, yeah, that's got it all. Okay, who wants to start?
Oh, I'm quite happy to. I guess the first thing was, in terms of the vehicles per day, is we needed some sort of clarification on that, and we've both agreed that the word.
So that's been done. That's good.
That's been done, and we've got agreement on everything else on this page. D is changed so that it's not two rules. It's only one rule. And there's an option there for the company as to whether or not there's 5 extreme events, or if there's no more than 2 extreme events, and just providing that option there. And
so the first comment from that, I presume the TR are Ms. Running's comments. Is that right? Is that what TR is?
Tanya.
Yes, correct. And PR is Paula. It was just the easiest way to combine it all together.
Sorry, you might need to turn your volume up. We can't hear you.
My apologies.
Okay, that's
Yeah,
better.
TR's me, PR's Paula. I pulled all this together into one document.
Okay, but you've said shouldn't there be a change? Oh, that is the change that's been made. Yes.
Yep.
So everyone's happy with that.
Yes.
Can I ask a question then on the left-hand column? The provisions in the column that we've just been talking about all relate to extreme events or other specified exceedances. You know, like B talks about a maximum of 20,000 people attending. C talks about how many arrivals per day and so forth. Why, and I suspect the answer is it's a carryover from the existing consent, but what's the necessity in this rule to talk about these minor, medium and major events? What role does all that stuff have in the rule?
Mr. Mitchell, if I can answer that from a transport engineering perspective, the reason why the arrival rates were determined is that when the modelling was done for the traffic management strategies, we were looking at the different arrival rates. So from a transport perspective, it doesn't matter how many people there are, it's how many vehicles arrive and depart and the rate at which those vehicles arrive and depart.
I understand that, but what purpose do they serve going forward? They're like, if you say, okay, we've got a minor event, let's say, where does that, it's a permitted activity subject to the rules in the right-hand side. So I don't understand what relevance they have, and I may be wrong. I don't understand it. Doesn't mean to say others don't or do. What's the purpose of listing those there? Does it have any flow-on consequence? Because I can't see one. I don't see anything in the. There's a reference to major events in the traffic management plan provisions, traffic management standards, but all the minor ones and the medium events, I can't see any reference to them anywhere else in the document. I don't know what they're there for.
There's one in the rule which says that there's no motorsport allowed on a weekday except a minor event. So I guess that's one.
But it then goes on to say a minor event that generates less than 700 vehicle arrivals per hour,
Okay.
which sort of restates the stuff on the left. Maybe it needs to say or 2,000 total vehicles per day.
Mr. Chair, is your point that all these events are permitted? So why break them down into subcategories when a fixed number would encompass all those events? Is that the point you're making?
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
I don't doubt that. Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
You go.
I was just wanting to refer, I guess, in my view, it is important to at least define the major and extreme events because there are additional traffic controls in the traffic standards at the end of the chapter. So, maybe less important for the minor and medium events, and I think it's probably more so. I mean, NZTA might have some further commentary on that, but
shouldn't they be in the traffic management standards though? Because there's a requirement in F to say the traffic management standards have to be complied with in order to be permitted. It just seems completely out of place here. And you read the rule and say, well, there's a minor event and I've got to go to the traffic management standards that don't actually refer to minor events or medium events. I would have thought it could say motorsport and recreation events, full stop. The permitted activity standards apply, and that all the stuff about minor events and major events and extreme events, to the extent that they are relevant, go into the traffic management standard.
Mm.
They just,
yeah,
they just seem to me, they just seem to me to confuse the issue being here.
Mm. Yeah.
Chair,
Does anyone have any comment on that?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, I'm not privy to the original consent, but I kind of tend to agree, as long as you've got the thresholds there, how it's defined, it doesn't seem to be treated any differently, like you say, in relation to the minor and medium.
Let's not spend too much time on it. Let's put a question mark by it, and we'll come back to it at the end when we get to the traffic management standards.
Could I just ask a question on that as we're going through? The minor events and the medium events would have, or would that have no influence on the state highway traffic on those days, because it would be a normal day's traffic could handle that sort of flow anyway, wouldn't it? So is there any need to have it specified? Does it interfere with the state highway? I mean, those sort of events are not a large number of traffic, and you know, it could be handled by that on-ramp quite comfortably, I would have thought, without even having to specify them.
Without referring back to the modelling, it's a difficult question to answer, but I agree with you, Mr. Fulton, that the smaller events are going to have significantly less effect than the larger events.
Yeah.
And presumably those sorts of events happen fairly often, don't they? You know, like if Audi run a track day or something, what's that? Is that a minor event? Or is that even less than a minor event?
So that would be a day-to-day activity.
Okay. All right, let's park it and come back, because I think it's just a structural issue, and I don't think anyone's disagreeing with the point. And the only reason that we're raising these sort of things is for the issue of clarity going forward, and making sure that the plan is really easy to read, and someone doesn't have to look in 3 different places to find the same bit of information. So you might think we're being pedantic, and we are, but these sorts of things have implications beyond Hampton Downs, and that's why we're keen to get it sorted out across the board.
So Phil, if I can just chime in quickly on this, from an operator's point of view, everything is really sort of governed by that extreme event, because if we exceed the minor event, well, with our threshold is really the extreme. Once we've reached the extreme event parameters, well, then you're looking at a special consent for the activity anyway. So all the first 3 are really governed by the last one, because if you keep, maximising that threshold, you just go up to the next level anyway. So I would have thought that you'd be governed by a maximum of 8,000 total vehicles per day. Anything over and above that would then come into a special consent.
I think that's what 26.6 does, except it refers to the threshold being the major event and drawing a distinction between major and extreme. But I think your general point is correct. Let's park it and come back, because it is a drafting issue, and we probably will focus a bit on the traffic standard drafting when we get to that point. So if people happy that we just put a ring fence around that at the moment?
Yeah.
Yes.
Phil, can we go back to P2 on that same rule? And there was just one wording issue that we had, and it
skip over that. All right. Yes.
Talked about motorsport circuit, which hasn't been used anywhere else in the plan. Can we change that to racetrack? Or something similar?
Does it need to say that? Because it's related to precinct A only, isn't it? Which is the operational motorsport area. Can't it just say driver training and education, testing and practice activities, full stop?
Correct. Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Again, for the purposes of conciseness.
Yeah.
Does anyone have a problem with that?
No.
Okay.
No, that makes sense, because it's within precinct A anyway. So
exactly. Okay, that's good. Let's keep going. Over the poem, page 5, as I see it. There's nothing on that table that anyone wants to raise. Is there anything from the panel or any drafting issues that people want to raise? Good. Next page.
Yes, in terms of 26114, we would like to see 80 existing residential apartments identified here. Because that relates back to the resource consent. And also my understanding is that all the infrastructure, traffic assessments, etc., have all been based on having this these 80 existing residential apartments.
So what is it you're wanting us to, what is the drafting change that we would need to make?
So P1 should read residential activity within the 80 existing residential apartments.
Dr. Mitchell, it's Carolyn here. Could I just ask a question, please?
Yeah, please do.
I'm just, Ms. Rolfe, what do you see as the value of putting a number in that activity?
So we just want to restrict it to alterations and additions to what is there now. There is concern that another whole level of apartments may be built on top of the existing apartments, or within the rear of the existing apartments, there may be the opportunity to add more.
And what's your concern about that? Just so that we're clear, not criticising it, just trying to understand what the point is.
So,
sorry, I was going to say, for those that don't know, the apartments are privately owned.
Okay.
They're not owned by the park.
Okay, that I didn't. I assumed that was the case when I asked the question, but I didn't know that. Thank you.
But this is to enable, isn't it? Isn't it? This is permitted. Why would you want to restrict the number of apartments that can be built?
well, as I said before, my understanding is that all the infrastructure has been designed. For example, all your water, your wastewater has all been designed around the 80 units, as well as the 12 industrial units, which relates to the next role. And all your traffic assessments all been based on this. And if you actually look at the precincts, they don't actually allow for a lot more development. But yeah, that's the proposal, is to put a number in there to restrict to what's already consented.
But you guys own the land, don't you? And although the apartments might be privately owned, maybe, and we've got to look out 10 years, in 5 years' time, you might come along and say, well, look, we want to stick a couple more apartments here or over there. So don't you have to, I can't make a case for you, but I'm just exploring that option for you.
I think the actual point would be to restrict the apartments in their current location or space, the privately owned ones, because the infrastructure is set up specifically for 80 apartments. It wouldn't be to restrict any future growth in other areas on the park.
Can I ask a related question? If we did make that change and we limited it to the existing residential apartments, and someone came along in precinct B and said, I want to put 10 more in, what rule picks that up? Because I'm struggling to find where anything that's not permitted in precinct D has a pathway, but maybe I'm missing it.
like anything that wouldn't comply with, say, the land use building rules and things like that. I think that all defaults to a discretionary activity.
Can you just point me to the rule that does that, just so that I'm not doubting that that's the case? That's logical. Oh, it'll be 26.1.4 in the new number. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, correct. Yeah.
I suppose the question is why is, I mean, I know you don't own the apartments, but why, repeating what Mr. Cooney said, why does the motorsport park care? Especially if you're the landlord and you can say, well, you might be permitted in the district plan, but as the landowner, you're not doing it.
Derek, are you able to provide some comment here, or would you prefer if I did?
No, what this is about is just controlling the internal amenity of the site. And so where you have private owners, this rule just make sure it's really clear to us what we can expect from them, and that they know that there are really clear guidelines around what they can do with that apartment. If we have to go down the pathway of a discretionary or non-compliant consent, whatever that default rule is, I don't know, then so be it. But we need the confidence that these apartments aren't going to create problems for us.
Mm.
Can I just make a quick comment? I did, this version came out after my rebuttal, and I made some changes, and I agreed to remove the term construction from in P2 as per Paula Rolfe's evidence. So I agreed to that, and I don't know if that was, if you're happy with just the removal of the construction component rather than setting out the number of apartments. Is that
in P2?
Yes, yeah.
So you're suggesting
I've just deleted that term, so it would just be alteration of a building or structure for an activity.
That makes more sense.
Are any of the residential apartment owners submitters?
No.
If I may, just to provide some background with the apartment owners. The original development of the park, the apartments were sold off the plans to fund the development of Hampton Downs, and essentially they were given the keys to the kingdom with very little thought to the consequences of that moving forward. So as a motorsport facility, we essentially have 80 people who are our neighbours right on our doorstep, and that has provided some challenges to the facility. So certainly, while we don't want to put anything in that limits our ability to develop in the future where we can, we certainly also don't want to open up some parameters where we have essentially 80 neighbours who feel that they have been given a carte blanche ability to further develop and, to a degree, hamstring what Hampton Downs is trying to achieve.
Okay, I understand the point. What does the panel think?
Yeah, I don't really know enough of how these apartments work, but I sort of approached on the basis that Hampton Downs owns the land, and therefore it wants to be able to reserve to itself the ability to further develop its land in the future, which may be applying for more apartment because they have been used in the past to fund it. So I'm sort of looking at that provision to provide it to be enabling for Hampton Downs to do that. And I just wonder whether you start bringing in restrictions galore, what's the purpose of it? These people might want to alter their existing units. I can't see that being a problem, but they can't go and build a new unit, I wouldn't expect, unless they demolish the existing one. So that's just my general comments on it.
My comment would be, by taking out construction and just going back to the alteration, I think I'm supporting Paul's view here. They can't construct anything on that site anyway. I wouldn't have thought they might be able to alter their units, but I don't think they could construct it. So I'd be happy if that went just to start off by saying alterations.
If we did that, it would, because it's the residential activity, it's not the building. And the permitted activity only allows you to alter an existing one. It doesn't allow you to build one. Does that cover it, or does it not? Or are buildings within the precinct permitted activities? Because if they're not, this change would be unnecessary, I would have thought. So if we look at the building rules as opposed to the use,
so I certainly support getting rid of the word construction and just saying alteration of a building or structure.
yes. Where are we? Land use building. We go to page 20, we don't have to scroll it down, but page 20 talks about permitted activity is certain buildings in precinct A. A 10-metre height limit in precinct B would be permitted. So under, if new, my reading of this is, provided you met the site coverage rules and so forth, if we weren't, if P1 was to stay as it was, this is back on page 6, if P1, the version in front of us, was to stay the way that it was, that would mean that you could build more apartments up to 10 metres high as of right, as I read it.
Mm-hmm.
Have I read that right, Ms. Major?
Yes, that's my view also. I'm not sure what is the height of the apartments at this stage. I thought they were close to that.
No, but the new one, someone would want to build, say you wanted to build 80 more,
yeah,
and they were less than 10 metres high, and rule P1 stayed the same as it was, the building under the rule that we were talking about on page 20 would be permitted, as would under this P1, as would the subsequent occupation of it by a resident.
Correct, yes.
So there would be no consent path, as it's drafted, there'd be no consent pathway for a new set of apartments on precinct D other than complying with the building standards, and they could go up as of right. And I can see an argument that says that does create reverse sensitivity effects irrespective of who owns the land for the motorsport park. You've got a whole lot more residents sitting there, and I mean, I can't imagine too many Greenpeace members, you know, buying one of these things, or someone that's hugely noise sensitive or doesn't like motorsport. But I guess that possibility could arise.
You never know.
Yeah. But why would that? Oh, okay, yeah. Just thinking out loud about Hampton Downs owns the land. They build new units. How would the reverse sensitivity come into it?
Because the apartment would be privately owned. It would have a unit title or something.
Yeah, just to clarify, it's a strata title, so it's private land. The 80 apartments are private land within private land. That's the sensitivity for us.
Yeah. And did you sell them with covenant, no complaint covenants and all that? Were they sold on that basis?
I'd need to look at the contracts, but that's my understanding, yes. And I know because I know for a fact that the lifestyle blocks that we've sold have been under that governance as well. So I'm assuming that would be the same for the apartments, but we can double check that. Yeah.
So why why the need for a consent, I suppose I'm asking. If you leave the word construction in, then that enables you to build the new units. You take out the word construction and you wouldn't be able to, would you?
Not under that rule, but you could under the building rule. The building rule would allow you to construct the activity, as I understand it.
Well, are you looking at 26.3?
26 points, yeah, I think I am. 26, yeah, 26.3. Yeah, 26.3.2 for a start, which is building height. Then it's got daylight admission. Then it's got site coverage. Then it's got setbacks. So as long as you met all of those,
yeah,
you could build a new apartment block as a building.
Yeah.
You wouldn't be relying on P2. You'd be relying on P1 just once you'd built it to say the residential activity within a residential apartment could then occur.
Yeah.
And you could do all that as of right.
Yeah.
Other than as a landowner saying, well, we're not doing it.
No, we don't want to do it. They're the ones that build the apartments, wouldn't they?
Mm. So how could someone build an apartment without the motorsport park's approval? They couldn't, could they?
No.
And what if you changed your mind? You know, what if you said you needed to fund more tracks or more stadiums or more perish the thought signs, you know, and all those sorts of things, and you wanted to put more apartments there? Wouldn't you want I mean, you control it all, as Mr. Cooney says, under you as the landlord, don't you?
We would only control the land we own, though. So if we were to put new residential or whatever it might be, it would be on our land and not where the pre-existing apartments are.
But how could you put more apartments? I mean, maybe is Precinct D full of apartments, or is there a whole lot of extra land there that you could plonk more on?
Yeah, certainly when I had a look at the site, I assumed that the precinct was pretty much covered with residential activity anyway, which included the yards for each of those residential areas. So the thing would be to overlay the precinct on top of Google and just make sure that there's not any extra space for development. But from my point of view, I would have thought that P1, if you related to the existing residential apartments, it would help resolve the problem of not allowing for more residential units in that area.
Is Precinct D in totality privately owned?
Ben, do you have an answer on that one?
Because if they're strata titles, surely they only own the apartments that they live in and the, you know, balconies and walkways and things, and any common areas. So do they own all of the rest of, you know, the bits outside the apartments in common?
Yep, that's correct. I'm just trying to find a map of the precincts, but they owned the land, so we're not their landlord in terms of.
Okay. Well, that is an important distinction, I guess.
Yeah. So effectively, they're an island within Hampton Downs.
So you don't have, other than the district plan rules, any provision, and being a submitter on a resource consent application, any other means of controlling development on that to the extent that it's not full already. So if someone wanted to expand it and there was land there and you could meet the permitted activity rules, that'd be it. You as the landlord would have no say so at all, well, because you aren't a landlord.
That's
their land.
My understanding, yes.
All right. What do you think about that then, Mr. Cooney?
Yeah, well, that's a little bit different because I thought it was simply strata title, and the Hampton Downs owned the land. And did you, Mr. Blair, did Hamptons sell the apartment land as empty sections?
It was the previous owners before our time, but they had sold off. So originally they sold off the land that Gull was, the Gull petrol station is on. It used to be Hampton Downs land. They sold that. Then they sold 12 industrial units that we refer to as the old industrial units. And then they sold the 80 apartments from the plans, all with the means of funding the next stage of development of the park.
So they didn't construct the units and then sold them off in that way. They simply sold them off an empty land, did they?
It sold them the plans and engaged Foster's Construction to build them.
Okay.
Well, if we work on that basis, what's your thought, Mr. Kearney? It seems to me that you wouldn't want to create a proliferation. If there was spare land there, you'd want them to be subject to a resource consent, wouldn't you?
Yes, I think so. Yeah, I would. If that is the case, yeah. What I was trying to do is preserve for Hamptons the ability to control what it wanted to do by way of further development on the park, rather than enable third parties to come in and do that.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a lack of control. So, yeah.
And they're saying they don't want to do that. So, yeah. I guess. So would the way around that be to say, rather than the 80 apartments, because then you've got to say which ones and who are they, and wouldn't we just say a residential activity within residential apartments existing as at whatever date, 31 March 2020?
That would work. Yeah.
So we say a residential activity within, take out within residential apartments existing as at, let's say 31 March 2020. That's,
yeah.
Would that work?
Certainly works from our point of view, yeah.
Okay.
And in P2, are you deleting the word construction, which was suggested previously?
Well, they're already existing, so it seems irrelevant, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Well, what if one was, I don't know, it was truck ran into it and it fell down? Is that in rebuilding it? Is that still covered?
Yeah, I was just wondering if we needed to include removing construction and put alteration or replacement of a building or structure.
Yeah.
That would seem to me to make sense.
I'm happy with that also.
Okay, everyone happy with that?
Yes.
You happy with that, Mr. Kearney?
Yes, certainly, yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Let's carry on down the page. So does this same issue arise in 26.1.1.5?
Yes. Yeah. So there's 12 industrial units there at the moment.
And they are privately owned on private land?
As I understand so.
Why do you care about industrial activity? I can understand the concern about residential encroachment, but why do you care about industrial activities? What if, I don't know, Maserati wanted to, build a test facility on the park or something?
I guess it's a commercial sensitivity. We'd prefer to be the landlord in that situation, build more industrial. So there's two sets of industrial units. One we refer to as the 12 old industrial units, which are privately owned. Same situation as the apartments. They were sold off from the plan, I believe, to fund the next stage.
And are they in precinct? Are they in precinct D?
That's my understanding, yes. And
Yeah,
then
okay.
New industrial units that we have built, as in Quinfinity has built, or HD Land, and we lease those out. So Toyota is a classic example. Toyota Racing is one of our tenants on Park.
And are they in precinct D as well?
Yes.
And the old industrial sites, do the individual operators own those, or do they lease those?
They own them. Oh, there's a combination, but they're privately owned, and the owners can lease them out, but they're independent of the current.
But they own the land and the buildings.
Correct.
And then right next door, you own some land and some buildings.
Correct.
You want to leave that as it is, Mr. Blair, is that right?
Sorry, I'm just reading through it. Derek, you got counsel on this one?
And so my understanding being here is that it's the same situation as we were discussing with the residential apartments, is that we just want to control what the activity within those is and restrict development, uncontrolled development that may create business or reverse sensitivity issues.
That's correct, yes.
But making the same change that we've made to the previous rule that solves the problem of stopping anybody else, but it doesn't enable you. You'd then be a discretionary activity to do your own thing, wouldn't you?
Isn't that part of another precinct we're talking about, those other industrial activities?
Well, that's what I asked. Mr. Blair said they were both in precinct D.
No, sorry, I've just pulled it up here. Precinct E is the industrial units, 12 units, that'd be the old units. The ones we own, I'm just trying to find what precinct they'd fit under. I believe the ones we own would fall into precinct A. They actually fall into the operational motorsport area.
You've got a line through P1 on industrial units, vehicle workshops and storage sheds.
So just looking at the map that's in the section 42A report, there is a business industrial area identified in precinct B. It's pretty much undeveloped as I understand, and will be developed next as part of the development of the site.
And industrial activity subject to gross floor area and other similar sorts of things as a permitted activity in that zone. So maybe, Mr. Blair, they're in precinct B, not precinct A.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
well, let's work on the assumption that they are. Ms. Major, do you have any insight into what activities are in which precinct?
Yeah, from my understanding and previously been on site visits, I think there are some within precinct A, and I had removed the term industrial units, but I left the vehicle workshops and storage sheds with my more recent Appendix 3. So
yes.
my understanding, next to the racetrack, there's possibly some kind of industrial or workshops and things that are there. So I'd only removed the term industrial unit because that came through as a recommendation from Ms. Rolfe, and I'm not sure.
Well, yeah, that's quite correct. You left vehicle workshops and storage sheds in, and Ms. Rolfe took them out.
Is that right?
Oh no, I think we may have actually indicated it. Sorry.
Oh yes.
Because
sorry, that's true. But Ms. Rolfe said agree with this amendment. These are provided for in precincts E and D.
And we're talking about precinct E at the moment.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So I wouldn't want to move the vehicle workshops and storage sheds because I believe that they do have those in precinct A.
Okay.
Industrial unit, Hampton Downs. I guess you can clarify that if you want that term to remain. I'm happy for that to remain. If that.
So vehicle workshops and storage sheds should remain. What's Hampton Downs' view on that?
Yeah, that feels correct to me because Precinct A originally had that included, whereas Precinct E is quite specific that it just includes the 12 old industrial units.
Okay, so let's go. Can we go back up to Precinct A, Ms. Kelly, on page 2, the one that we were dealing with earlier on? Yeah, that. Keep going down. There, and under F, can you put vehicle workshops and storage sheds and F back in, please? Only have deleted industrial units. Everyone happy with that?
Yep.
Yep.
So now we go back to where we were. I'm sorry, I'm glad we're doing it this way because you can guarantee that if we hadn't done this, whatever decision came out, everybody would be saying it's stuffed up. So, so now we go back to hold on, where are we?
I think you've gone past it, I think.
Yeah, we've gone past it. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah. So I asked the question, why are we wanting changes to precinct E?
I think Hampton Downs are saying these are privately owned in the same way that the apartments are, and they don't want any more industrial activity there. But if that's a trade competition issue, because you want to keep competitors out, that's sort of a bit of a no-go area for us.
Yeah, that's why the reverse sensitivity issues remain important as well, and how they're going to interact with our site.
So
what we can accommodate is those 12 units, and we don't want them to expand beyond that, really.
What's the reverse sensitivity issue, though?
It's industrial.
It's hard to see what a reverse sensitivity argument would end up looking like, other than the trade competition one dressed up as reverse sensitivity.
We do have challenges around the units when we are in a larger event in regards to considerations for them trading and traffic as well. If the park was to go down a line in the future where events were a more significant part of the way we move forward, having those 12 and the apartment owners actually provide some further significant considerations that we have to go through.
What sort of things are they?
Well, it can be quite difficult for those businesses to a degree to operate when we are, for instance, on a major event, because it's a challenge for their customers to be able to come to site is one of the arguments that they could have. So we can manage that within the 12, but to extend that becomes a further imposition isn't quite the right word, but it creates a bigger challenge for the park to be able to minimise the effect of events on those on new businesses.
Wouldn't that apply equally to your own ones though? So you're wanting to, you know, you're being very sensitive.
We manage that because we're the landlord, and it's a condition that they agree to when they sign the leases in regards to what the conditions are around operating or not operating when we're on event. We don't have the similar ability with the old industrial units.
So what is the ability to develop in Precinct E? How much potential is there still left to build further industrial units there?
I'd have to refer to Paula or Derek or Ben on that one. I'm just not sure of the exact land area there. Paula, are you aware of that?
Certainly, Precinct E is only a slither of land. It doesn't look very big at all. As I said before, we'd have to overlay the area on top of the precinct or vice versa to get that idea. But Precinct E, if you see on the map on page 7 of the Section 42A report, shows a very small area and looks like it just goes around those existing buildings anyway.
It's right in the corner, is it? Yeah.
Yeah, it's right in the corner.
What page was that on, did you say, Ms. Rolfe? 7
of the Section 42A report.
Document. Sorry about that. What have I done? Sorry, I'm talking to myself.
It's also on page 106 of the 42 report.
Here we go. Yeah, it's pretty tiny.
106 has got it blown up.
It probably theoretically forms the same argument with the apartments, because the apartments, I would have thought, would have been built out in a similar percentage as what the industrial units are. So it'd be more if they went up or could expand out slightly. But I mean, I would imagine that they're built to 85, 90% of the available land.
Yeah, but the purpose of the district plan isn't to promote at everyone else's cost the interests of your business. I don't mean that in a derogatory sense. You know, it's about managing effects on the environment. And the more I'm listening to this, and I'm just probably speaking out of turn saying this, but this sounds more and more and more like a trade competition argument dressed up as amenity of our neighbours, because it's an industrial zone. And you know, anyone going into an industrial zone at a motorsport park says when the V8s are on, it's going to be impossible to freely access my site. You know, I'm just not sort of getting too excited. I understand the residential one, that makes sense to me, because you don't want residential neighbours moving in and then saying, oh, it's too noisy, I didn't realise it was like this, da-de-da. But an industrial neighbour, it just seems to me that you want to control the development rights, and that's the end and finish of it. And we're not in a position to make decisions that relate to trade competition, and we haven't had any actual evidence about what the effects would be on those industrial operations, other than the general statement that says they might get a bit upset when we're running a big event.
I think, as I said before, Mr. Chairman, is that the water, your stormwater, and your sewage is all part of the effects of any future development on the site. And when the development of these 12 units were undertaken, those things have all been considered, even with your traffic impacts. And I know if they develop further, they're going to have to show whether or not they're going to have any adverse effects on those matters.
What about your precinct B though? Do the matters of the building standards and everything else address sewage and services? I don't know that they do.
Well,
so the same would equally apply to say that there's no, if they're not serviced at the moment and there's no provision in the district plan to require them to be, so they shouldn't be allowed either.
I'm sure there is provision to require that. I'd just have to go through and check through the matters.
Where's the problem if we just leave?
Oh no, it is an RD1.
Yeah, it is water, stormwater, and wastewater management. This is a permitted activity.
Yeah, but
there's no linking criteria though, is there?
But that doesn't apply. Doesn't that apply also though to if you go to precinct B, which is where you want to do it, under industrial activities? There's nothing about stormwater in there. It's all about gross floor area.
There's no performance standard relating.
There's no performance standard relating to that. It's only if it doesn't comply with those matters that you end up in that RD category. So I think you've got to be consistent. You can't say that these new guys don't have stormwater and therefore they can't get consent as a permitted activity, when on the same hand you're saying, well, we haven't got those facilities in place either, but we want to be permitted because it's our property. I mean, I just don't think that argument carries water. No pun intended.
I'd rather see industrial precinct E left as it is, because did the operative plan have, this has all been brought over from the consent, isn't it? There's no provisions in the operative plan applying to this area, is there? That's right, is that right?
Yeah, so the this area was all zoned as rural, and it just had all the consents that have been granted so far have been under the rural, within the rural framework. And so this is why, one of the reasons why we introduced this zone, to kind of enable the ongoing development so that it's not constantly being assessed against the objectives and policies of the rural zone, which are very different.
So
you've also got a permitted activity rule that says that in precinct D, the site coverage for the precinct, for the whole precinct, can't exceed 45%. That's on page 21.
So it'd be pretty close to that now, I'd suggest.
Yeah, so I think we're as the panel are finding not much attraction for changing 26 1.1.5, but we'd rather come to that conclusion with your agreement than impose it on you.
It's very similar to discussions that we've been having with Mr. Reid on Lot 6. In theory, we look at it and go, hey, industrial could be appropriate there, but then when we start drilling down into the details, how will it interact with extreme events? What sort of industrial activities are going to be carried out? Do we need restrictions on the type of industrial activity? It becomes a whole lot more difficult for us to say, hey, we're happy for more industrial and that fits in with our activities. Let's say we have air discharges, which would normally be permitted as an industrial activity. will that be undertaken on site amongst the motorsport park area? And how will our patrons or customers react to that? It's about controlling that amenity of the customer as well as us. And so if further industrial activity is going to be permitted within that precinct E that we can't control, and we can't control the amenity of our customers, then would need quite a few matters of control put on them to ensure that those protections are in place.
Wouldn't those same controls need to be applied to you in precinct B though? Because you could sell precinct B tomorrow. This is about the land use, not about who owns it.
I guess our focus there is when we control it, we can control when we own it, we can control those effects. And when we don't own it, that's when we become concerned. And so I understand your point. Quite how I work that into the plan at the moment, I'm not sure whether. But yeah, does the panel understand the sort of the issues that we would have if further industrial activity or undefined industrial activity is introduced and the effects they might have on our patrons?
At a theoretical level or a conceptual level, I guess, bearing in mind that if they were emitting sorts of air discharges that were having adverse effects on your customers, I would have thought that would have likely triggered air discharge permit requirements under the Waikato Regional Council's regional plan, though.
I think the original consent defined what industrial activity could not be undertaken on site as well, and so it restricted the types of activity. Maybe that's something we need to look at.
Okay, I mean, I think I take the point. What do you think, Mr. Cooney, and what the rest of the panel?
Well, I sort of struggle with the concept that you've got other industrial activities in the other precinct. Which one was it? B. And now you're coming and wanting some restrictions on precinct E, and that you express concern about what people might say about reverse sensitivity effects and so forth. I just find that it's a point made by the chairman just earlier about you're trying to have a bob each way to suit yourself, and I struggle with that a little bit. That's my view.
Yeah, I guess for me, I see it a little bit differently. Really, the area is a rural area, and this is a special zone within the rural area. So at a kind of getting a rising above what Hampton actually wants, I see merit in restricting a growth of industrial activity within that zone, and particularly given that Hampton isn't asking for more industrial activity. They're saying that they want a limit on their industrial activity. I'm actually in favour of that, because in essence, the surrounding area is rural. And, you know, a lot of the submissions were about the impact on people using the highway and distractions and so on, and the less distractions that there can be, in my view, the better. So that's how I'm kind of viewing everything, rather than kind of getting down into the detail of the precincts, etc.
I suppose from my
sorry, Mr. Nyes, Mr. Fulton, you carry on.
No. I suppose from my perspective, I can understand what the issues are with Hampton Downs and why they're wanting to do this. I mean, they've it's not the way it was set up. I can understand why it was set up, and they wanted to sell the land off pretty early on to cash flow the development. And now the unintended consequences of that have left the owners of Hampton Downs now in probably a position that they'd rather not be in. There's a legal argument that you and Paul have much more experience about than I would, but I can fully understand why Hampton Downs are wanting to have control. over this, and I just how we come to that. It may not be permitted, but I can understand the sentiments.
Well, look. If Hampton Downs wants to remodel 26.1.1.5, then certainly I won't. I'm not going to die in the ditch about it. But I wouldn't sanction it if it was a way of enabling them to promote their future development of industrial land, because of putting a restriction on precinct E. I'd struggle with that.
And that's my view too. I don't want to die in the ditch on it either. And I suppose to the point that there's no submissions on this point either, as I understand it, probably adds, or no submissions other than the Hampton Downs people, I mean, probably. I mean, I'm not going to die in the ditch on it either. So I wonder whether we don't make the same change that we've made to P1 in rule for the residential precinct D and apply it to precinct D as a way of moving forward.
Yep.
I think the other point to note as well, and the reason why I used the phrase before with the apartments, it's an island, it's private land within private land. Look, there'd be governance that they're allowed to access our land to get the apartments and the industrial units, but they still need to use our roadways, they need to use all our facilities and utilities within those private areas. So we don't want to see increased traffic on the park and all those other sensitivities that would come with further development on the land.
Okay.
To be consistent, make it the same as precinct D. Yeah.
You say precinct D?
The one with the change we made.
Just immediately above.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think, Ms. Major, in P2, isn't there a P1 missing at the end of P2 after where it says rule 26.1.1.5? Shouldn't that then say P1?
Yes, correct. Yeah, I've missed out the P1.
Yeah. And we delete the, please, Sandra, in there. And then add P1 in P2 below, right before, after, just where you are there. That should say P1. And should that also change? That should be consistent. That should say alteration or replacement of. Yes?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Excuse
I don't know
me.
how everybody's. Oh, pardon me?
Sorry, excuse me. Have you seen that Derek has lost the ability to hear us? So are we able to just take a couple of seconds to try and get him back on, please?
Has it? Oh, he sent a chat. Yeah, there's a.
Yes.
Apologies, I seem to have lost the ability to hear you. I will fix ASAP. I'll send them a nice note. Okay. I don't know about everybody else, but it's probably time to stretch our legs anyway. I think you're back, Mr. McLaughlin. you hear us now? Can you hear us, Mr. McLaughlin? You've got you're muted. I don't know if that's the issue. Maybe you can unmute if you can hear us. I don't think he can still, can he?
No, I'm not hearing anything from him, Phil.
No, but he's got his microphone muted.
Let me just send him a quick message and see if he can.
I don't think he can hear us. Mr. McLaughlin, if you can hear me, can you just sort of wave your arms around or something to indicate that you can? Because we can't hear you. No, he can't hear us and we can't hear him. You might have, what was that happening? There was a ding dong then.
That was me. Perhaps whoever's hosting the conference can actually unmute him.
He's gone anyway by the look of it. I think he's disconnected himself.
I did try unmuting him, Josie. Yeah.
Pardon me?
I have tried unmuting him.
Okay.
Let's wait till we get him back. But I think, I don't know about everybody else, but I haven't been following the time. I've just been concentrating on what we've been talking about, but I wouldn't mind stretching my legs and have a pit stop. And when we get him back, I'm going to suggest that we just take 10 minutes to do that.
Is that a pun on the word pit stop?
Oh yeah, that was cleverer than I thought.
Can I also just ask a matter of what time this finishes? Are we going until we're at the end, or are we finishing at 12 as per the calendar?
We're going to finish. Who's asked that question?
Sorry, that's Josie from Hampton Downs.
We're going to finish when we're going to cap that. I think we were optimistic that we'd finish quickly. And I think we'll speed up, but we're going to carry on. If we have to take a lunch break, we will.
Sure.
But the whole purpose of this is to start it and finish it. We don't want to leave things hanging.
I think that break would be advantageous to perhaps just move a couple of things for us this afternoon as well, if that's all right.
Yeah, I think we'll speed up quite quickly though, because I mean, you do what you think you need to do. I don't think we'll finish by 12, but I'd be pretty surprised if we don't finish by 1.
Okay. Thank you.
So we have a break here, Phil, about what, how many?
Yeah, let's do it now. We may as well not waste time waiting for someone that can't join us. Maybe let's adjourn until 25 past, and then during the break, if one of the Hampton Downs folk can see if they can resurrect Mr. McLaughlin, that would be good.
So everybody just walks away from their screen.
Yeah, you can if you turn your well, do what you want, but if you mute your don't log off, just walk away. But you can turn your video and off while you're doing it if you want to wander around or whatever. Similarly with mute. So we'll see you at 25 past.
Sure.
Derek, where have you gone? Derek, can you hear me?
Oh, hi, Sandra. Yes, I can hear you again now.
Excellent. So they are just breaking until 25 past.
Right.
Yeah, so we'll be back soon.
Thank you. I hope that wasn't because of me.
No.
Cool.
No.
Perfect. Right, thank you. I'll see you again then.
Okay.
Yes.
Hi everyone, I think we're good to go again. I think what we should do, I'm pretty confident that we'll finish by 1, but if we don't, just so to help people organise their afternoon, maybe we'll break at 1 for maybe an hour, let people do whatever they need to do, and if we have to, we can resume again at say 2 o'clock. Would that cause anyone any problem if we did that? I'm assuming that's a no, so that's good. That's what we'll do then. So if we press on, as I say, I think we'll speed up quite a lot now, because I think a lot of what we've been discussing actually is some of the more important things. So let's resume, and I think we're on page, we've done that. So now we're over on the next page. So there's no issue, I don't think, with the deletion. There's no comments made about the controlled activity for the motorsport events in Precinct A. So if we can scroll down to get as much of that on the screen.
So just before we proceed on, we've been talking over the break, and if we could just return to the top within the Precinct A. We've just been talking, and we wonder whether we have missed something through the deletion of 2 of the permitted activities relating to, if we can scroll the document up.
Let's go back and see where we are then, okay?
Yeah, and I'm sorry to retraverse issues that we've already gone through today.
No. We'd rather, the nature of how we're doing this, I think, means getting it right, not leaving it till later.
We're H and J. The basis for the instruction to remove those was that they were to be accommodated elsewhere. But as we've worked through F, we've realised that they aren't accommodated, and they were originally consented for Precinct A. And on that basis, we'd quite like to retain those. I was wondering if Council Planner had comment on whether they can be retained or not.
Which ones are those?
H and J, the blue ones at the bottom.
Okay.
What's the basis for deleting them? Who deleted them, and
the original basis for deleting them was that we'd understood that they were accommodated in other areas, and so they were already anticipated and still permitted. But as we've gone through today, we've realised that that's not the case. They do need to be located in Precinct A, and so on that basis, we'd like to retain them.
So does that include the travellers' accommodation and campground and hotel accommodation? Is that?
Yes.
Right.
what was the submission was it your submission that took them out? Hampton Downs submission that took them out in the first place? Why were they taken out?
Is that right?
It's not as a result of a specific submission as such. It's more kind of come about through reflecting the precinct areas and the permitted activity rules. So there are some that maybe pushed the scope a bit, but it's just something we picked up on later in the piece, was that these activities were in fact already provided for in the other precincts. But I mean, by all means, if they are also undertaken in Precinct A, I'm happy that those remain.
So you've got no problem with them coming back in, and Mr. McLaughlin's telling us that those are provided for in the existing resource consent. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Does anyone have any comment on that? I don't think we have any issue with it.
No.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for raising that.
Thank you for that.
Just one thing, the point that you raised here about the consent, allowing those. If we go back to the ones we sort of had a big debate about, Precinct D and Precinct E, that's the residential and the industrial areas, and we sort of restricted any further development. Does the consent allow for future development on those sites in terms of residential and activity in the respective precincts? The point I'm making is that if the consent allows for future development within those particular subzones, as it were, then we're coming in with a rule that then restricts what was permitted under the consent for future development, and it may have an effect on existing landowners or title owners or whatever within those precincts. That's all. Perhaps we can come back to that right at the end.
Yeah, that might be useful. Give me a little bit of time to think over that comment.
Okay.
I suppose the succinct question is does the existing consent limit you to the 80 residential apartments that you've been referred to and the 12 industrial units that have been referred to, or are they more generous than that?
No, my understanding is that they are restricted to those.
Oh,
okay. Well, let's take that as our working hypothesis, but I think in fairness to all of us, if you could confirm that before we finish up, just to make sure that we haven't got that wrong, I think that would be helpful.
Yes, we can do that. Thank you.
Okay, great. Righto, let's go back to page 7, and we're on controlled activities in precinct C.
So just one matter here that we have raised. I mean, we've got agreement on all those amendments in C1 with NZTA, but we believe that there's a rule missing which should be in C3, and that was to provide for the construction and operation of buildings as provided for like any other zone.
Yes, you'll see, as per my rebuttal, Appendix 3, or the one that went up last night, the more recent version, I've added that Rule C3 in and included the matters of control.
Thank you.
Where have you C3? I don't have. I have C1 and C2, unless we're talking about different C3 than I'm looking at.
No, it's not shown on the version with all the tracked comments. It's in my most recent version that went on the website last night, Appendix 3. So that's not what we're looking at on the screen, I believe.
Oh, so we haven't. Okay.
I emailed that to you yesterday, Phil.
That's what I thought I'd printed out.
Okay.
It's the only one I've got.
It's the only one I've got too. Just double checking. Oh no, there isn't. Sorry, I printed this out yesterday morning. I didn't. Yeah, I've got it now. Sorry. Has everyone got it? We don't have it on the screen, but has everyone got a copy of that available?
No.
Yes.
Who doesn't have one?
Me, Paula.
I don't.
I think you were. Let's just check.
When did it come in?
The commissioners should have got it at 5:01 p.m. last night in an email from Sandra.
And Derek, you forwarded it to me, didn't you? Was it you?
Yes, I forwarded that through to you.
Yeah, and you'd sent it to Paula and everybody else too, I think, if I remember rightly, saying that.
This is the track change version, the consolidated track change version, the final comment. Yes, that was sent through, and Paula should have received that about 3:30 yesterday.
Yeah, that's right. I thought so. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, this is a different version, and it is up on the website. It's the revised Appendix 3 to my rebuttal.
Have we got this one? I'm just really concerned that we're going to end up with a complete stuff up here, but we're editing one version and it's not the latest version. Do we have a Word version of this one that's gone up on the website? So
I'll
I think
flick
if we
through a
do,
copy
we should swap it over. We can make the changes that we've done at a break. But I just think it's a bit risky that we start looking at documents on a screen that aren't the right ones. Just while we are waiting, there's that same issue about minor and medium and major and extreme events that we raised earlier. Let's park that until later, but I think the same issue arises there. And am I right, Mr. McLaughlin, your amendment to C3, no, sorry, that's not correct. The amendment that you've made to, I think you've made some further changes to C1. No more than 2 extreme events are held in any year when an event. I know you haven't.
I think it's just the per day that's been added on.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Sandra, I've just flipped you through the link for the Word version. There was another thing too that I had missed out in terms of the activity-specific conditions. So G should refer to Rule 26.5 and 26.6, and that's the same for P5 as well.
Okay. Can you make that a little bit larger, please, Sandra? One more, maybe. One more.
Yeah.
Everyone read that okay?
Yep.
Okay. So let's start at C1. Is C1 resolved as between everybody? Yes?
That's my understanding.
Cool.
Yeah, so between D and E on the right-hand side, there should be or. So, and it's combined into one rule. No more than 5 extreme events are held per year, or no more than 2 extreme events are held in any year.
Yeah, and that's
so does that mean that if you choose to, so that if you choose 2 extreme events, you can't hold any more extreme events? What's that? No more
I
than
think it's saying
2.
you can do 5 a year, but if you have a supercar event, you can only have 2 others.
Yeah.
That should be or. The wording that you've got highlighted, Sandra, should be or, and the letter E should be deleted. They should all follow on into one sentence. Should say or, no more than, and it should just flow on. There should be no E.
Correct.
Lowercase n. Yep, good. So everyone's happy with that? We'll come back to this issue in the red stuff on the left about what all these minor and major events mean, but we don't need to retraverse that now. Let's go over the page to C3. Should the wording in the left-hand column, not the green one, should that say C1 and C2 or C1 or C2?
Or
Is it both or either?
could be both.
But it doesn't have to apply to both. It applies to one or the other, doesn't it? Or not? Does it have to, do you have to be a controlled act? You have to, it's not
It's
a building
really,
that's covered under both rules. It's a building covered under either rule, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess my view is that if we have got a new C3, then we could we don't need C2.
Ooh, what's happened there? That's gone. C3 is a building. C2 is an activity.
That's right.
So why do we not need C2?
C2 refers to facilities. So C3 provides for a building or structure. So I don't know, maybe those could be merged, or I don't know if we need both. That's what I'm saying here.
Could I just say something, please? I have just reviewed the Appendix 3 to the rebuttal, and it's missing quite a lot of stuff that was in the document, the version 6 of the changes agreed between the agency and Hampton Downs.
There's a replacement Appendix 3, so it should have highlighted green areas that were agreed to, or that came through as a result of, I incorporated those changes that were agreed to from the document that was circulated yesterday afternoon.
Okay.
Yeah, so you might be looking at the wrong
I might have
one.
been looking at the wrong one. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, it's a bit confusing. There's a couple of appendixes there.
That looks better. Thank you.
We there? Phil, are you there? Yeah.
Yep. Shouldn't the wording between C1 and C2, assuming we leave both of them in there, shouldn't that say C1 or C2? Because as it stands, you have to be something that's authorised by both those rules in order for C3 to apply, and it should only apply if one of them's satisfied, isn't it?
Yeah, I agree with that. Or is the appropriate word.
Oh, you're talking about C3. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, that's what I was talking about. So that should be or. Yeah, but, so I think that's quite a good question. What does C3 do that C2 doesn't?
C2. Oh, sorry, I'm talking at it too.
Because one's the facility. So this is construction or alteration of a building. What's the difference between C1 and C2, perhaps? C1's the event, C2 is the facility. What does the facility mean? Does that mean the buildings?
Normal meaning is buildings and that.
So why do we need C3?
C3 was to cover off buildings, facilities.
Doesn't C2 do that? That's what a facility is.
Well, I think we should expand facilities to include any building and structure, and then that should cover it.
So if we go back up then and say on C2 and say motorsport and recreational facilities, including buildings, then we can delete C3.
Yep.
Yes?
Yeah.
Because all the matters that are controlled, or a lot of them are, well, hold on.
Is this perhaps the same problem we've had elsewhere, the difference between the activity and the physical structure, whether they can be rolled into the same activity?
Yeah, I think that's right.
The different assessment criteria.
But there are different yeah, exactly. about, you know, that C3 has dominating landscapes and all those sort of things, whereas C2 is only about how noisy it is.
Yeah.
I would have thought C2 is unnecessary because C1 is the activities. You know, you can race cars around and all the things that go with that. And C3 says you can build the buildings that you need to have them. So why do we need C2?
Yeah, I'm happy that C2 is removed and we rely on C3.
At very worst, there's a whole lot of overlap between them that I think is just unhelpful. Just means it hasn't been worked through carefully enough. So are we happy to delete C2 and replace it with C3? Provided that I think that's all we need, isn't it? C1 takes account of all the events.
Yeah, I'm happy with those two.
An old C3 covers all the effects of the building. So C2 can go, can't it? Yeah?
Yeah, I'm happy with that.
Anyone have any issue with that? Oh, gone. So that should be C2, and the bit in green on, sorry, not in green, in the next column over should delete reference to C2. Listed in rule 26(1.2.1. Yeah, that goes. Okay?
Yep.
Everyone happy?
All good.
Okay, let's move down.
Mr. Chair, if you go back to what we were just discussing just earlier, precinct C, and you've deleted C2, is there a distinction there between C1, which is motorsport and recreation events, and then you've got motorsport and recreation facilities, which is different from events, and it covers not just buildings, but it seems to refer to things like hours of operation, and isn't it intended to cover associated things other than events that take place in this precinct?
C1 covers things like hours of operation, frequency, size and scale, traffic and parking.
But I wonder whether that facilities is like a repair garage or tyre display areas and things like that, and then it's different from the events, and I just wonder.
Yes, I agree with that. So what was C3 then say? Construction or rater of a building for an activity listed in 26(1.2.1. No, I think actually it's a good point. It's a fair point. Maybe we say, maybe the way to correct that, I think that is correct. Would C1 say motorsport and recreational events and facilities? Because it does have control over hours of operation and all those sorts of things, which picks up the matters that were in C2 anyway.
Yeah.
Because all the controls in C2 are part of C1. Would that work? Motorsport and recreation events and facilities? Or and associated facilities?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that works.
Or we couldn't, or maybe it's neater to say in C3. I don't know. Construction or alteration of a building, structure or facility or an activity listed in Rule C1.
I think I'd prefer the way you set it out earlier.
First one. Okay, that's good. Let's do that.
Tell me what I'm doing, Phil.
You're going to see. You're going to C1 and saying and associated facilities.
Okay, thank you.
I might just want to cut. Yeah, that's good. All right, let's keep going. So, as I understand it, this RD one is meant to cater for everything that's these one-off big events like supercars. Is that correct? Because it's not a minor or extreme or whatever event. Is that right? It's bigger than an extreme event.
Correct.
Is it? Yeah. Okay. And I think we agreed at conferencing that RD made more sense than full discretion. Everyone's happy with RD1?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, great. And then we've got a default discretionary activity rule. Yep.
Yep.
Now, are those changes to RD1 in the version that we had before, the one with the comments boxes? NZTA agree, Paula Rolfe has agreed. So that is all agreed, yes? I just want to be very clear. Yep, okay. Yes. So now we're over to the land use effects side of things.
So noise certainly is an issue. I guess one of the first things is the changeover from L10 to LAEQ, and I do understand that the council has obtained some expert advice, and as part of that expert advice, they note that there is a difference of 3 dB in relation to L10 and LAEQ. So LAEQ is at the lower level.
The higher level, in my understanding.
The higher level, yeah, you're right. Yeah. And then plus they've also advised, because of the type of noise there is, potentially there is another 5 dB penalty. So in effect, there could be 8 dB difference. And one of the requests is to ask for P1D to be added to allow for a special audible characteristic penalty shall not be applied. So in other words, that 5 dB penalty would not apply as part of any measurement.
Let's pick those off one by one. I mean, that's Mr. Humperson's from Tonkin and Taylor's report that's appended to the rebuttal section 42A report.
Correct.
And my reading of that, Ms. Major, is that's what he has said, what Ms. Rolfe said about the 3 dB difference. That's correct, and that's your understanding?
That's my understanding, correct. It's a 3 dB difference, but it works in favour. The other end, the LAEQ, would result in a increase. So it's better off, you know, I guess, for Hampton Downs, more permissive. Well, yeah, allows an increase of 3.
It's a benefit to Hampton Downs, isn't it?
Yes, that's my view.
Yeah. Somewhere
is it saying that though?
I'm not sure it does.
Difference of If the same limits remain in the district plan with the parameters altered, e.g. a limit of LA becomes LEQ, this is to an allowable increase. That seems inconsistent with the first sentence, but it says the LEQ is generally around 3 dB lower than the L10. Oh, I see what it's saying. No, that's right.
Yeah.
Well, I would have thought you'd be wanting to be quiet about that, Ms. Rolfe, and roll with the punches. You don't have any objection to using LAEQ, do you?
Oh, certainly that's what the national planning standards are requiring you to do. So, you know, you need to really be in sync with that.
But this gives you a 3 dB advantage, even though he's also saying it makes very little difference. It's only, what are you asking us to do?
So we're asking that as part of D, and that's part of the New Zealand standards, to put a additional note in there that a special audible characteristic penalty shall not be applied. So my predecessor has obviously had talks with a noise consultant who recommended that this note goes in so that the 5 dB penalty would not apply.
But isn't that a matter of measuring the noise as it happens? And the standards in C and D allow for that adjustment to be made if it needs to be made, depending on what the sound characteristic is.
But if you've got a rule in the plan, you can have that to be not applied. And
why would you do that though? By saying, I mean, that's only true if it doesn't have special audible characteristics, or if it does. And if it doesn't have them, it doesn't apply. And if it does, it does. It doesn't change the standard. Because it's got to be measured and then assessed in accordance with the standard. And the standard says you can apply a 5 dB penalty if it's appropriate. And isn't that appropriate in the circumstance?
Yeah,
Otherwise, you're bypassing the standard.
Yeah, what it's requesting is that you can apply for the penalty not to be applied.
Only when it doesn't apply.
So I'm not a noise expert. I'm only going based on what I've been advised. And, you know, I can't comment any further in terms of how this is actually measured.
Mr. Humperson's addressed that. He's addressed that on page 2 of his memorandum. Let's just see what it says. It says NZS 6802 requires an SAC penalty to be applied of up to 5 dB where a noise source may be particularly noticeable due to its characteristics, e.g. a tonal whine. The noise level, including the SAC as applicable, is referred to as the rating level. Some district plans include a correction, whereas others require the application of the penalty. We recommend that the latter approach is preferred, hence there is no change to the determination of noise limits or rating levels within the proposed district plan. And that's the only noise evidence we've got, and I don't think that's agreeing with you, unless I'm misunderstanding what he's saying.
Isn't that last the sentence, some district plans include an SAC correction within the noise limit, isn't that saying that you apply that within the rule where appropriate? And so while the default position within the standards is that you apply the penalty, but it's up to the decision maker to amend that district plan rule.
Some district
Here we think that removing that presumption of a penalty is appropriate because the original consent wasn't processed with a 5 decibel penalty. And so it's achieving consistency. So where the actual noise limit or the noise produced hasn't changed, we result in the same level of compliance. And so it's just ensuring that consistency.
I guess I just go back to his last sentence. We recommend that the latter approach is preferred, hence there is no change to the determination of noise limits or rating levels within the proposed plan. Doesn't that say leave it as it's drafted?
that's what it's saying, but we did have advice. As I say, my predecessor spoke to another noise consultant, and it's
Yeah, but
based
that's not evidence that we can rely on.
No, I understand that. But that, you know.
He's saying S802 requires a special audible characteristics to be applied where a noise source has those characteristics. And he says there's two ways of dealing with it in the district plan.
And we're asking it to not be applied.
I'd feel very uncomfortable putting that in without it being supported by a noise expert, and we've got the measurement standards there. They recognise audible characteristics, and it's built into the assessment. I'd feel, you know, unless there's some further independent noise expert evidence to say no, you shouldn't be applying that to Hampton Downs for these reasons. I think we could open up a can of worms if we put that type of thing in without expert evidence.
Yeah, well, that's where I'm coming from, and I agree with that. I mean, it seems to me that you've got the 3 dBA clawback anyway by using the LAEQ rather than the L10. That's point 1. Point 2, the standard only applies, the standard is explicit as to what happens. The standard says that if there are special audible characteristics, you get a 5 dB penalty. There's no provision in the standard to relax it, as I understand it. And point 3 is, and this is the one I don't know, what's the existing consent say? Does it have that exemption in it?
No, certainly not that I'm aware of, although I'd quite like the opportunity to check that out.
That's fine, check that out. But I think on that basis, I think you're flogging a dead horse, to be really direct about it. I mean, this is trying to codify, you know, that's what we spent 2 or 3 hours last week talking about. You know, the purpose of these provisions was to codify the permitted activity, to the activities in the existing consent. You've already got a 3 dB advantage. And then on top of that, with no actual hard evidence, we're wanting to relax it and create a precedent that's got all sorts of implications. I just think that's a step too far. I think we'd be persuaded if the consent had it in it already, because then all we'd be doing is rolling it over. But I think without that, I think we'd be on a hiding to nothing. What's your view on that, Mr. McLaughlin?
Yeah, I understand your point, sir. What we're not trying to reduce the noise limits that we are currently having to comply with. We're trying to keep the actual noise limits that we're producing, so we're not creating any further non-compliances with surrounding activities and things like that. So what we're trying to achieve is consistency, and I think that we need to go away and maybe just produce something extra for you on that, and have a think about whether that's something we want to pursue.
Can I just add something? I've got the copy of the consent condition 3 in front of me.
Yes.
And it's already got an advice note that refers to NZS 6802. And it requires that noise levels are to be measured in accordance with that. So there's no change on the consent in my mind.
And the standard itself doesn't have any mention of this consent overrides the 5 dB penalty for tonal characteristics, does it?
No.
So the current consent essentially mirrors what's in P1, other than referring to L10 as opposed to LAEQ. Yeah? Correct.
It does refer to the 1991 standard. I don't know if there was a change with the 2008, so that may have to be checked to see if that came through.
I think the 2008 is the reason that LAEQ's there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yep.
I think that's. I stand to be corrected, but I don't think anything other than that has changed. Well, let's park this. I mean, I'm very keen for us to nail this today, if we can. You know, if we then go back and say, let's have more, you know, more information on this, that, and the other thing. I think that sort of detracts a little bit from what we're doing, which, you know, we're sort of running this as much as a mediation, if you like, as opposed to a strict hearing. And I think we'd be pretty reluctant to sort of take the lid off things when we've agreed everything else, because I think, you know, we've given everybody a hell of a lot of latitude to have this conversation, because if we hadn't had this conversation and we just listened to evidence, I don't think we'd be getting to the nuance of things like we are at the moment. And I think this is working out a lot better for everybody. So I think by the look of it, I still think we might finish by 1, but I think if you want to consider that further, my suggestion, Mr. McLaughlin, would be that you can talk about that over lunch and then we come to a landing on it, because I would really like us to leave today with a bow around this.
Yeah, I take that point, sir. If we can just have time over lunch.
Yeah, that is fine.
Just a 1 p.m. break, and then we'll come back to you after that.
And just bear in mind, you are getting an additional 3 dB in the change to LAEQ, because that's what the expert says.
Yes, yeah, and that's the only expert evidence that we've got. So
yeah, so what I'm understanding the current position is that we gain 3 but lose 5 through the SAC, and so there could be no, that's not correct. You gain 3 and you lose 5 if you've got special audible characteristics, and you would have lost those under your existing consent anyway. That's my understanding, and I could be corrected on that, but you might need to think about that over lunchtime. So we think you're just our presumption is you're gaining 3 dB full stop, and you're not losing anything. Thanks for that clarification. I'll come back to you after lunch on that.
That'll be great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Righto, let's keep going. P2 and P3 look fairly uncontroversial.
So I'd just like to bring up the point that as part of P1A, there was a variation undertaken for the consent at one point in time.
Yes.
And that actually changed some of the provisions.
And what have they been changed to?
So, and this is where I don't have clarity, because I don't have a copy of the variation, but it talks about providing for the V8 supercars. So the condition as outlined below was what it was changed to. A, on not more than 27 days per year, and not more than 10 of the 27 days to be on a Sunday or public holiday, in between the hours of 9 and 6 to a 56 dBA L10. And then there was an exception that in any year where a V8 supercars event is not held, that a noise level of up to 54 dBA L10 will be permitted between the hours of 9 and 6 up to 30 days. So the request was to amend to correctly refer to the latest noise condition. So I was looking at this P1A, and I have a little difficulty in trying to rectify this condition that I've been given into the rule, because you're talking about going from 56 or 65 dBA down to 56 for a period of time. So it needs a little bit of clarity as to what part of the condition was varied.
Well, I mean, we're not in a position to sort that out. We haven't got any evidence, I don't think, about that other than the general concern that's being raised. How do you propose that we deal with this?
Well, I think we should get a copy of the consent that was varied.
Yeah, but you've had every opportunity to provide that to us. You've had evidence, you've had conferencing last week, and then we're hearing about it now when we're supposed to be going through and fixing stuff. I mean, you're pushing the boat out a hell of a long way and getting an awful lot of latitude from us.
Sure. So my question to Hampton Downs is this variation was undertaken as part of the V8 supercars. Is it absolutely necessary to include it in the rule of the plan? Because it wasn't part of the original 2006 consent.
Well, I think what you need to do is think about what that permitted activity rule, bearing in mind that it's a permitted activity rule, what it controls and what it limits. It's not a permitted activity rule for, as I would understand it, for a supercars event, because supercars events aren't permitted activities. So I'm struggling to understand the point you're making. If you've got a specific rule that relates to supercars that aren't permitted under this plan or by the existing resource consents on an ongoing basis, surely it doesn't apply. Can you help us, Mr. McLaughlin?
Just trying to work my way through that, sir.
I'm glad you're able to, because I'm struggling.
Yes. Is it the 65 decibel with an AI that we're stuck on at the moment? Is that where I am?
Well, Ms. Rolfe is. I'm not sure that we're stuck. We're just sitting here trying to figure out what we're being asked to consider. But yes, that's my understanding. But
And I'm comparing that to a variation.
Yes.
That said 56. Am I correct?
I'm not sure. I only heard what Ms. Rolfe said, but I think that's right.
Well, I'm looking at it and going, well, 65 is higher than 56. Why am I going there?
Yeah.
That thought has crossed my mind, I've got to say.
And so my understanding of the V8 in the blue dictation, it went through a variation which has been considered as part of what's in front of the panel. So
Yes.
everyone, I understand, has agreed to that. I don't
Yes.
understand why I would be going back to looking at standard of 56 dBA. And
Well,
so I'm happy with where that
my
drafting
mind.
is. And so I'm quite happy with where that drafting is sitting at the moment. But again, can I add that to a list of things that I'll talk with Ms. Rolfe with over
Yep.
lunch?
Excellent.
And confirm with you.
Very good. That's helpful. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I think this is a general noise standard, and it would apply to the supercars unless the supercars exceeded what's in there. So it would actually apply, and indeed it's contemplated with the blue there, of course, except that anywhere blah blah blah.
Yes, yeah, that's right. The blue part is what makes it relevant. Bearing in mind that it's a permitted activity rule, and the supercars aren't permitted by the other rules. As I understand it, they are RD activities.
Yeah.
So even though the standard might or might not apply, the RD rule for the supercars, which is the one we talked about before. Can you just scroll back up, please, Sandra? And stop there. 26.1.3 is the supercars rule, for want of a better description, and council discretion is restricted to noise levels and duration as one of the matters of discretion. So it doesn't matter what the standard says.
No, they can seek a higher standard. Yeah.
Is that your understanding?
Yeah.
That's your understanding on the face of it too, Mr. McLaughlin, subject to what you do over lunchtime?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, righto. Let's keep going then.
So just going back to the, I think it's a bit further down, the noise management plan. Is that in there?
Keep going down.
Okay, so that's all been scrubbed out. That's okay.
So just explain what the basis for deleting P3 is.
Would you like me to explain that, Phil, or are you?
Or somebody, just to be clear, I'm satisfied that everyone's happy that it goes, but I'd just like to understand why before we move on.
Yeah, pretty much required a noise management plan prior to any event. It was quite onerous. It kind of came through as a result, or came through in the notified version. And from my understanding, there is an overall riding kind of noise management plan that Hampton Downs operate under anyway. So.
Okay, because I think one of the questions
for that, yeah.
Because Mr. Cooney had raised it with the panel before we started. Do you want to raise that, Mr. Cooney, your question about management plans for every single event?
Yeah, and we'll get on to the traffic management plan too. But my concern was that every time you have an event, you require a noise management plan. Well, that's pretty onerous on the operators of Hampton Park. So I raised that and thought, well, the normal way in these type of things, unless it's a one-off event, you have an overarching noise management plan that applies across the board. And if over time you need to change it, then you vary that plan. So I was interested in raising this point, and so. It looks like you've taken that on board. I'm not sure. So do you want to comment on that?
Is that for me to answer? Sorry.
Yeah.
I can't. Yeah. So no, I have removed it.
Yeah, for that reason though. That's the reason you deleted it.
Yeah, generally, yeah.
Okay, no, that's cool. Very good.
That's good.
We're happy with that. There's nothing, let's just make sure we're all on the same page as it were. So that's all fine on that page. What's that red that's been, oh no, that's the same one that's on my list here, that's okay. Sorry. I'm right in saying that the landscaping and screening provisions, we move down past the deleted stuff, I think, please, Sandra. Am I in the right place? Yeah. Let's just pause and just read that. So that's relating to new buildings and requiring them to be screened, which makes sense. Everyone's happy with that, correct?
Correct.
Yes.
Yes.
And we've got an advice note that says it already exists. Do you think it's, I mean, is the purpose of that advice note to say that, what's the purpose of the advice note given that this relates to new buildings? Which presumably that plan may not necessarily have addressed. So what are we actually saying there? Are you saying that that plan already covers P1 or it may cover P1?
It may cover P1. And so the reason we wanted to draw your attention to that within the plan is because when you're assessing a new building, you know that you've got some landscape mitigation planting already protected and further may not be required. And so we don't want to be creating new landscape mitigation plan after new mitigation plan.
No, and I totally understand that, but you're not saying, which is the point I was wondering about, you're not saying that because that exists, the requirement's obsolete. You're saying that it's a relevant matter to consider. And I think we should make that clearer because it's not, okay. I don't think it's 100% clear. I think we should say a landscape mitigation plan exists as part of the 2006 resource consent. Someone needs to help me. It needs to say something along the lines of that may satisfy the requirements of this provision or something of this rule. I'm not sure that that's the right wording, but do folk agree that something like that's appropriate to add?
Yes, I'm happy with that.
Yeah, I'd be pretty happy with that. Certainly gives the regulator knowledge that there is this landscape mitigation plan that could be used, and it could be used in conjunction with something additional they may have to provide as part of any new development.
Mr. McLaughlin, anything that you can immediately help us with there?
No, I think that achieves the purpose of it. Being an advice note only, I don't think we can go too wrong. Putting in that last sentence, it makes it really clear what we were trying to achieve with it. We're not trying to say, as you were cautioning against it, the rule is redundant.
No, that's good. Well, I think that helps then. So panel got any problems or suggestions or questions about that bit? Okay, good.
Is it subject of or subject to? I'm just trying to read it to make it make sense to me, that P1.
Any new building or land use activity within precincts blah
Yeah. Is it
shall be
subject
screened
of,
from view from road users
on State Highway 1 and local roads and immediately adjacent sites in the rural zone by landscaping that is subject to a landscaping plan? And then should it be or a landscaping maintenance regime?
Don't we just need, it doesn't all, that's a very good point. Doesn't it just end at by? By.
By.
Shall be screened from view. Oh no, by landscaping. Yeah, I see. That is, we do need something otherwise, because the landscaping plan itself doesn't solve any problems. It's just a bit of paper. You've actually got to plant things. By landscaping that is undertaken in accordance with. Yeah?
Yeah.
Sounds good.
And I think when I read this, this wording, somebody needs to go back through, I think, the whole chapter and just ensure consistency. So earlier we talked about adjacent sites, adjacent rural sites, and now we've got immediately adjacent sites in the rural zone. I just think there needs to be consistency in the language.
No, that's a good question. A very good point. It should be in accordance with, please, Sandra. Not in accordance of line 1, 2, 3, 4. Yep. I think that's a very good point about the consistency of language, and I don't think it's, I mean, we'll all go nuts if we try and do that by committee. Some of us might already be there. All right. Okay, I think RD1, subject to that point that Mr. Yahor's raised, is fine. No one's got any comments on that. Move to earthworks. Everyone's happy with those. They're pretty standard as far as we can tell. Very good. Just to be clear, we've deleted 26.2.6 and 22.2 sorry, 26.2.7, because they're picked up later, correct?
Correct. Yes, that's right.
So that's just a move. So we'll cover that later. Same with all the rest of this. So we can move on to car parking. Yeah.
So, Mr. Chair, just in relation to your earlier point, here's a reference to a medium event.
Yeah, there is.
Major and extreme.
I wonder if we leave it to someone else to do, because I think what we're going to do, we're going to agree things today. I'm absolutely determined that that's where we're going to get to, but I think it's going to be subject to some drafting, and I think that we'll issue some instructions around a time frame and a methodology for doing that. What my thinking is that rather than take a whole lot of time about it now, I still am of the view that the reference to those in the permitted activity rules is in the wrong place. And that we should have a definitions section or something within this plan that says, for the purposes of these rules, the following terms have the following meanings. We say a minor event, a medium event, an extreme event, and then, because they're orphans where they're located at the moment, sitting inside those permitted activity rules. Does that seem a reasonable approach?
Yeah, that's the method that's going through my head at the moment, sir.
Okay.
Definitions portion.
Sounds fine.
I think what we might do is ask you folk. I mean, obviously the Hampton Downs guys are going to talk with Ms. Rolfe over lunchtime. I suspect that might be a reasonably quick conversation. And if you want to get your heads together with the other parties in terms of figuring out that process stuff, that would be really helpful. And then we can, when we come back, you'll have thought about it and conferred, and we can wrap it up pretty quickly. Does that sound okay?
That sounds good, sir.
Okay, let's keep going then. I think we're up to signs, aren't we? Glare and artificial light. The glare stuff seems uncontroversial. The signs provisions, I know we've spent a fair bit of time talking about those previously. Everybody's happy with the provisions in 26.2.11?
Correct.
Yes.
Okay, that's good. Everyone's happy with P2, the sign size stuff? Yes, good. Let's keep rolling. 26 point, this one that's deleted about the travellers accommodation. Is that picked up somewhere else, or is that, what's the reason for deleting that?
Yeah, the contents are moved within the permitted activity rule for precinct C.
Yep.
So there are
Yep, okay.
activity-specific conditions. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. That's what I thought. And that's the same with the next one, 26.3.1.
Yeah.
Height, we've talked about that. That seems pretty straightforward. The daylight admission seems straightforward. Site coverage, straightforward.
Yeah, I've just got a question on that site coverage one, Mr. Chair, and that noted that it's a discretionary activity with any non-compliance. Shouldn't it be an RD for any non-compliance, and the restriction relates to the non-compliance rule?
What's your view on that, Ms. Major or Ms. Rack?
Yeah, I don't have an issue with it, to be honest, changing to an RD. There was no specific submission point requesting a lower activity status. that we could use.
I think where it makes sense to make things sensible, we're not going to be ever hung up on points like that. We've made that clear at previous hearings. You know, we're not going to be pedants to, if we wanted to, we'd find a rule, a submission that would give us scope to change a lot of stuff. And we're going to be pretty liberal in that when it makes sense to do so and no one's affected.
You'll have to bring in some sort of a restricted assessment criteria.
I'm wondering if they're the same assessment criteria that relates to daylight admission that's in the rule above.
So a very simple way of doing that is that you can relate it, the discretion could be related to the non-compliance.
I think it's going to be a bit more.
I think it's got to be a bit more nuanced than that.
Yeah.
Because the effect will be building coverage that has all sorts of potential issues like dominance and shading and all the things. I would have thought the starting point is the list that's in the RD above.
Can we just move up to those matters?
Yeah, they're not all relevant, but some of them are.
That should be fine.
Yeah, I would be happy just with reference to those.
I think I don't know that building height is necessarily, well, maybe it is. Maybe it is in the sense that, you know, if it's bigger and higher and wider, but I'd be more inclined to take that out. Design and location of the building, admission of sunlight, privacy and amenity values. Does that seem reasonable?
Yeah, that seems reasonable, sir.
What does the panel think?
Leave that one. I think it's grabbing those assessment criteria and bringing them down into site coverage. I understand.
Sorry, say that again, Ms. Rack. Sorry, I missed some of that.
Sandra was just grabbing those and bringing them down. The assessment criteria.
Design and location of the building is
that right?
fairly broad.
I
think that looks okay personally.
I think it's just got another sentence that we can just about.
Yeah. There's a drafting issue to say council's discretion is restricted to the following matters. That bit, the bit in B there. Does that look okay?
Yep.
Just on the height one, which is 26.3.2, I think it's just missing in P2. I think it's missing structure. It's got building, but I think it's missing structure. Just go up, Sandra. Up. Up.
Oh.
Keep going.
Tell me when to stop.
Stop there. It's got a building or shell. I think it's just missing structure.
Okay, no, that makes sense. And that's consistent with some of those other rules, so that's good. Right. NZTO folk can wake up now. We're on traffic management standards.
Sorry, can we go back to 26.3.5 and do a similar thing? We've got a description of the activity for anything that is non-complying with the rules above. So that's under 26.3.5. Need to go down.
Building setbacks. Yeah, I think that would need to take at least the full list from 26.3.3. I think height's relevant in that one.
Yes.
Okay. Right, the NZTA folk can wake up now. Can I just get an understanding from folk before we get into the specifics? Is NZTA happy with what's here?
Yes, we are. Now that we're sort of looking at the right version, we got a bit confused with the right version, but I think...
Yeah, no, well, yeah, I think we all got a little bit confused, but that's okay.
Yeah, I think our parts are further down the screen. The additional bits that were previously missing, I think are further down in green. So
can we just move, and I think, can we just move down there? Those bits there.
Yeah, I mean, those are the things we were seeking.
Yes. All right, what's the Hampton Downs views of these provisions?
So we agreed to those on the basis that they were as part of the existing resource consent.
So you don't have any questions or queries outstanding in relation to 26.5 or 26.6?
Correct.
Yes?
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
Okay, that's good. The one thing that I think somebody should do is, I don't think that any of this relates to so I'm just thinking about this minor event thing. And I think we'll leave that for folk to think about during lunchtime. I think Mr. McLaughlin agrees, at least in principle, that rather than have these minor event references in the permitted activity rules, there's a statement somewhere that says, for the purposes of these rules, the following terms have the following meanings, or something to that effect. And if we do that, then it seems to me that the traffic management stuff makes sense. Does the panel have any comments or questions on 26.5 or 26.6?
Yeah, it's the same as I brought up for noise. Why are you requiring a traffic management plan for every event? Now that's even a minor event, and it really becomes, I can understand it for the larger ones, but it requires whenever there's an event at the park, you've got to prepare a traffic management plan. And I thought it would be more efficient and less onerous if there could be a overarching plan that's in place for these lesser events that just stands there and underpins those events. And I've had an experience in Tauranga here where we did have this similar type of clause for the Bay Park Speedway, and it really did make a lot of hard work for the operators of that park. And I think it was then changed to an overarching traffic management plan. So I just raised that point with you, and I'd be interested in seeing what your response is to that.
Mr. Mitchell, can I comment on that?
Yeah.
So Robert Swears here, for WSP for Transport Agency. Mr. Cooney is correct to an extent. The thing is, you have a traffic management plan, but you can have a traffic management plan, for example, that covered all minor events. So you wouldn't have to have one for every minor event, but you would annually renew your traffic management plan.
Yeah.
And so when an event has actually been held for some of those smaller events, what I would anticipate is that there would be a traffic management plan covering the full year, and just a requirement in the traffic management plan for Hampton Downs to contact Waikato District Council a few days before those minor events and say, we're having an event. Are there any issues such as you might be having works planned for Hampton Downs Road that might affect our ability to install the traffic management that's needed? So
I think that's a very helpful clarification. It's just that B doesn't quite say that. 26.5B says, prior to any motorsport and recreation event being held, a traffic management plan shall be prepared and lodged with the Road and Control Authority for approval no less than 3 months before any event. Somehow or other, we need to short circuit that, don't we?
I mean, from a traffic management perspective, I think the wording is okay because the traffic management plan would be in place before any event, but it would apply to multiple events.
Well, I think we need to clarify that because I think it's capable of being interpreted the other way. You know, some very enthusiastic council planner can say, I've got a document here that relates to the event held in March last year. We're now in May and I haven't got one. And this rule says I should. So I understand from a it's not just traffic management people that are going to be reading this condition, it's the people that are implementing the plan. And I think if you read it on its face, Mr. Cooney's point's valid. And there's an expectation that there will be a new document prepared. Is this one that would be useful to have the same sort of advice note that we've had in the landscape one, but worded differently, to say something to the effect that says nothing in this rule prevents a single traffic management plan being applied to multiple events of the same general type and nature or something. That's not the right wording, but it would seem to me that would help.
I think the important thing is that what you've suggested, I think, makes a lot of sense because any traffic management plan would be subject to approval by the Transport Agency if the state highway is affected and by Waikato District Council if the local roads are affected. But I can see the sense in having an advice note just clarifying that it's not a traffic management plan for every event, but they can cover groups of events.
Okay. What do the Hampton Downs folk think about that?
Certainly from a planning point of view, I think you need that clarity to make it clear to the regulator that, you know, there is an existing traffic management plan that can be utilised.
Mr. McLaughlin, does that make sense in principle to you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the discussion last week, Ben may be able to elaborate on this. He attended the conferencing, but was that there would be that overarching plan and sort of reviewed for the bigger events that, sort of like the V8, which is done through the consent. So that approach makes complete sense to me.
I could just clarify, Mr. Mitchell, I would anticipate there would be a traffic management plan for every extreme event, but for the minor and probably the medium events, you could get away with the generic traffic management plan that covered multiple events.
Well, wouldn't you want? I mean, it's still got to be approved by you. But if I made an application to you that said I've got these sorts of extreme events coming up, and you know it's the one traffic management plan, but it's still relevant, I'd still want to be able to say that to you. I take your point, but there's nothing in this rule that says if something's out of the ordinary, then it doesn't require its own traffic management plan, because it does. But if someone can be creative enough such that you've approved a plan that says it relates to this, and this, then there shouldn't be any reason why that approach shouldn't be taken, should there? Extreme or otherwise.
I mean, that could work. It's just obviously when we get to the larger traffic volumes, the traffic management tends to be more complex. But I would anticipate that even if the traffic management coordinators for District Council and Transport Agency were insisting on a plan for every extreme event, a lot of it would just be changing the dates, resubmitting it, getting it approved and moving on from there. I wouldn't anticipate very significant changes unless things had gone wrong.
Yeah, no, and that's accepted. How about this as a starter for 10, so that we've at least got something written down that says at the bottom of 26.5, I'm not sure whether we're calling them advice notes or whatever we're calling them, it just says nothing in this rule. In fact, I don't think this is an advice note. I think this is real. Nothing in this rule prevents a single traffic management plan prepared under this rule from applying to multiple events.
I'd bring that in as a rule.
Yeah, I think it's part of the rule. Yeah, I agree. I don't think it's an advice note, because advice notes can be, you know, ignored. It still means that it's got to be approved by NZTA as the roading authority.
Phil, under this rule,
Nothing in this rule prevents a single, I'm not sure if we're calling them TMPs by this point or traffic management plans.
Yep.
Let's call it TMP. A single TMP prepared under this rule.
Yep.
Applying to multiple events.
Can we add to the end of that? So can we say applying to multiple events of the same size? So you could have a minor events traffic management plan, a medium events traffic management plan.
Yeah, but you might have the same management plan that it deals with both. It does. Why does that have to be the case? It's just saying that you've still got to approve it.
Yeah. Yeah.
If I come back and say, look, I'm preparing one management plan that's going to cover all my activities for the next 5 years, and here are all the sorts of events that I've thought about. They relate to this, and this. Here's one document, please approve it. And you come back and say, yep, we're sweet with that. It's got a big event, a small event, and these sorts of events. It only applies if the event is captured by the document. If the event that's being captured by way of its type is different, then the management plan wouldn't be relevant. So I don't see what the purpose of that is. Because I might prepare one document that says here's the minor event one in the major in the next one up, whatever that's called.
You could do it that way, just be a slightly more complex traffic management plan.
Well, that's what we just want to say. And that's the weighing up between saying, do we have one plan with a bit of complexity in it, or heaps of plans that are simple that take a lot of buggering around to get approved?
It's a comprehensive management plan.
The reason I'm a little bit cautious is from a network management perspective. We have these things called generic traffic management plans, which are quite fat documents, and they do tend to be quite difficult to find your way around. But you are correct, Mr. Mitchell, you could have a traffic management plan that covers the range of event sizes.
Okay, no, that's cool. I wonder if we shouldn't reference, when we go back up to whatever, we should give this a number, or like a C or a D or an E or wherever we're up to. And I think in the wording to be, at the introduction that said, which is the one that says before any event. So that's, I think that's, yeah, that's, let's say that that's E. If we go back up to B, I think B should start off with the words that says subject to E below, or subject to E. That might not be the most elegant way of wording it, but then it links the B to E. Does that make sense to you, Mike? Mr. Wood? Sorry.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with that. I mean, as you say, we've got the other rule saying that we requires our authorisation as well anyway. So.
Okay, that's great. Maybe we should just go back up, Sandra, if you wouldn't mind. Maybe we should say subject to rule 26.5 E. That's how we've worded it everywhere else. Then, what do folks think about that? Does that seem to make sense?
Lowercase for prior.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a very practical approach.
Yeah, and thanks for raising that, Mr. Kearney. I think that's clarified things, taken away the concern that you had, as I understand it anyway. .5 applies to everything, doesn't it? Yeah. So 26.6 is additional to 26.5, not instead of. Correct? Am I right in
Correct.
thinking that? Yeah.
And it only applies to major and extreme events.
Yeah. Should it say, I just wonder for the, oh no, it says additional standards. No, that's okay, that's good. And that mirrors, 26.6 mirrors the existing resource consent condition, correct?
Except for clause H, which relate the 4 months, which we agree with.
Yes, yeah.
The consent that's just been issued for the
yeah,
latest
okay,
event.
no, that's good.
Yeah.
Good. Ooh. Well, I think that's got us to the point where it's pretty much 1 o'clock, not quite. I know that's been a bit tortuous, but I think if folk over lunch can just think about the matters that we've been discussing, I think it's going to be very helpful if people have got words that we can then go to, because I think our sense is likely to say, our sense of process from here on in, and that we're likely to issue some sort of memorandum to the parties confirming what's been the subject of the hearing and the matters that have been agreed by the parties, just so that we've recorded something and locked it in as best as we can, so that, you know, over the course of the next year while we're having the rest of our hearings, people don't think up a whole lot of new stuff to bombard us with. Do we want to quickly run through the things that are going to be talked about over lunch? Just to make sure that we don't come back and then
yeah, I think that would be useful for me, just so I know exactly that I'm going to address everything that you want from me.
You tell me what you think you're going to be doing, and we'll tell you if we agree or not.
I have 2 points of agenda. One is to address the special acoustic characteristics and to confirm whether that's something we want to pursue or not.
Yes.
And then the second was to do with the section 127 variation, which impacted the 56 compared to the 65 decibel limit, and how and what it is that we're seeking there in relation to that provision.
Yep. The third one that I've got is to also consider how the reference in P5, which relates to these definitions of major minor event, can be addressed in a way that doesn't confuse and so forth, the 2 rules that relate to it. It's P5 and C1.
Yeah.
The first C1. Is there anything else from the panel that that they believe that we've raised but needs to be finessed over lunchtime?
No, I think that's a fair comment. Just a question to Mr. Swears. Do the events, the major events, does that take up for the state highway? Does that mean that they've got to put out cones and have traffic lanes and so on to divert enough traffic for 8,000 cars per hour? Is that how? Is that those major events are significantly greater than the other events? Is that?
That's right. So for the minor events, for the minor events, I anticipate that the traffic management would all be on Hampton Downs Road and the interchange wouldn't be affected. But when we've got the major events, particularly because we need to make sure that people heading to Hampton Downs get onto the correct off ramp, there would be signage on the highway network. And from memory, the traffic management strategies that were developed in 2006 included an overview of that.
Okay, that's good. Thank you.
There was just one other issue, Mr. Chair, that Paul raised earlier, and that was the use of the terminology precinct and whether there was a better term that aligned with the NPS. It's not, I didn't think it was a major issue, but it's in my notes for something to be considered.
I think the thing that we can't do over lunch that is we will talk about as a homework exercise is to have, notwithstanding that we want the provisions to be agreed working forward, there will be some issues around consistency of language and you know, when we talk about adjacent sites, we use the same term throughout and those sorts of things. But we'll talk about that as a general. I don't think it's realistic to get that nailed down over lunchtime. But I think I've noted that down anyway as something to do once we've got this other stuff sorted. Just so that everyone can go to lunch, Sandra, would you be able to send another meeting request? Because I'm going to do something else for a while and I don't want to leave this running. Could we just get another meeting request that we log back into at 2 o'clock, please?
I was just wondering whether or not Hampton Downs could utilise this meeting for a discussion, and you could always stop your video and mute the rest of you, and then we just carry on.
You could carry on, but I want to be able to get back in after 2 o'clock because I want to do another Zoom conference call shortly with something completely unrelated to this, because I thought we'd be finished by now.
Well, I'll set up a Zoom conference call for Hamptons and send it through to you as soon as we're out of this meeting.
Okay, and I think that's probably safer just in case the recording's not turned off or someone says horrible things about Mr. Cooney. I wouldn't want him to be upset.
That wouldn't worry. I've heard